behind the net. Predators pass the puck to Philip Forsberg. Out left wing side. Took a long bounce into the Jet zone. Turned back over at center. Roman Josi. Now here's O'Reilly. He scores! Ryan O'Reilly scores on the pass from Roman Josi. It's all tied up.
Ryan O'Reilly scores at the end of the third period to tie it up 3-3. And that's all that they needed. Because we can start with the bad news. And the bad news is the Predators did, in fact, lose last night. But the good news is it didn't matter. They got it to overtime. And they got 1 point, and that is all that the Predators needed to clinch. The Predators officially are headed to the playoffs. X by the Nashville Predators name. They do fall 4-3, but in overtime, and that's all that mattered really. D. Mace, how we doing? Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Remind me of the what was that? Beverly Hills Cops. The boys are back in town. The Nashville Predators are back in the playoffs. Woohoo! I mean, great. I mean, they went down 3-1 early. I'm like, oh my goodness, we may have to wait another game to see them clinch this point.
3-1.
Exactly.
A 3-1 that didn't need to be 3-1.
Exactly. But then they hunkered down and, they played good hockey. I'm surprised they didn't have more goals as many times as they put the puck on the net. Mm-hmm. What was it? It basically ended up being 2-1 as far as shots on net.
They dominated them.
Oh my goodness.
They kicked the out of the Jets for the most part. They had a bad
First
6
period,
minutes.
yeah.
It wasn't the first period. They still had more shots,
Scored first,
more scoring chances.
Exactly.
Got the first goal. They just had a lull for this 6 minutes where it's like, what? They got 3? Like, how did that happen? But the rest of the game really was all Predators.
Yeah.
All Predators. That's the most encouraging thing to me
Yeah.
that came out of the game is Winnipeg had everybody. Right? They couldn't sit there and go, we had this guy out. We're resting this guy. They put their whole lineup out there. They could not hang except for their goalie.
Yeah.
Connor Hellebuck is a heck of a goalie.
Hellebuck is hell of a
kept him
good.
He's hella good. He is.
Exactly.
He really is. He's going to win the Vezina.
Yeah.
And he'll deserve it. But I think that is, even though they lost the game, it was kind of like Rocky to me. Like you walk out of there, they got the point that they needed, and you just have this feeling of bring on whoever you're going to play in the first round. Winnipeg is as good as anybody, I think. Maybe you could argue Dallas is a little bit better, or Colorado's a little more explosive, or Vancouver's got a lot. Regardless of who it is, this Predator team can play with anybody. I think they believe it. You could tell they believe it. They're down 3-1. And as the game's going on, you're just sensing they're not satisfied. Just saying, well, we'll get them Friday. We'll just beat the Blackhawks Friday, and if we don't beat the Blackhawks Friday, we'll beat the Blue Jackets on Saturday. They didn't have that mindset. They were like, no, we're coming back in this game. I don't care how good Hellebuck is. We're going to find a way to get back in this game. And the crowd sensed it. The crowd is really they're realizing what's going on. How good this team is. That's what the special thing is about what's happening right now, to me.
It had very similar feelings to me to the Vegas game.
Yep.
When it could have been so easy for the Predators to just roll over and say, look, we're on a 17-game point streak. It's not our night. It's the defending Stanley Cup champions. We're still in a good place. We'll just go ahead and we'll wave the white flag and we'll move on to the next game. They could have done that easily.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that either Andrew Burnett or Barry Trotz, maybe both even touched on. Like, look, it could have been so easy for them to say, we'll concede and we'll move on to the next game. But they didn't. They were determined to come back, and they won that game. And it was the same feeling last night, that you're down 3-1 in a costly Philip Forsberg turnover, and they could have said, look, we're going against one of the best goalies, if not the best goalie in the planet. We're peppering the net with shots, 48 shots last night, which that's becoming more of the rule rather than the exception of like a 40, 45-plus shot night, which is incredibly fun to watch. But they could have said, look, it's just not our night. We're going up against a great goaltender and a really good team. And, yeah, like you said, Willie, we got Chicago on Friday. We'll win that game. We'll clinch on Friday. but there is a sense of relentlessness, and I do think that that's kind of become kind of the trademark of this team and of this franchise for this season is this relentlessness, this buy-in, the fact that you can never quite shake this Predators team. It's like a gnat that just keeps flying around. You just can't seem to get rid of it. Every time you try and swat it away, every single time that any opposing team tries to swallow this Predators team, they just come back, and they just continue to play harder and continue to play faster and continue to just kind of eat away at whatever deficit that they might be in. And I think that's an overarching statement of the Predators' play the last month to 2 months. But last night was a microcosm of that. That this Predators team is not going anywhere. Down 3-1, they're not going anywhere. And I think that they played much better than the final score would indicate. They played much better throughout the game than a 3-1 deficit. And you saw that final result come to fruition. And I think that last night was also a microcosm of what Ryan O'Reilly has been giving you. That he is so clutch, and he comes up in the biggest moments. And a had-to-have-it moment last night, who found the net? Ryan O'Reilly. Who got you to overtime to pick up that single point to be able to clinch and get you to the playoffs? It was Ryan O'Reilly. And I think that there's several players that we could highlight from last night. Luke Evangelista continues to play his butt off. He's playing the best hockey that I've ever seen him play. I think last night was probably up there with one of the better games I've seen him play in a Predators uniform. Spencer Stastny, I think, continues to play really well and very encouraging hockey. So overall, just, I understand that they lost last night. But looking at this team as a whole, looking at the last couple of seasons and looking at last night, this team's special.
Yeah, they are. And I think they're just now, and we said this before about this team. They finally have figured it out. They know, how to play within this system. Listening to Barry yesterday on when he was on with Jared, he just talked about some of those things. Like, we know who we are as a team. We know this is how we play each and every game. We may win some. We may lose, some, but this is the standard of play that we, that we put on the ice just about every other day. And like you said, yesterday was just a microcosm of that, being down 3-1 and then really kicking it in and really showing your dominance or exerting your dominance over this team. They got a hell of a goalie, but you found ways to put the puck inside the net. So kudos to them, and hopefully they can continue to play this way. I am sort of a little bit concerned.
The starts?
Yeah, the starts are a little bit concerning because you can't do that in the playoffs. You're not playing teams that you, at least the first round you're going to be playing against one of the top two teams in the Western Conference. So you got to figure out a way not to have those spells within games. You had it against Arizona, you had it last night, you had it against Colorado. These spells where for whatever reason you're not playing the way that you should be playing or the way that you're accustomed to playing. So that's the one thing that worries me. But beside that, UC's playing excellent in the net. You're getting scoring from all four lines. And this team just seems like they're picking up. They're gaining more and more confidence as they play.
Yeah, I think that's the prevailing thing. Now we can have the discussion that we were having. We were wanting to have and sort of having, but now with the X next to your name, you can now decide, all right, you got 3 games to go. How much are you pushing to win these last 3 games and hold on to wild card 1? Because it's looking more and more clear now that if they can hold wild card 1, it will be Vancouver. If they slip to wild card 2, in other words, they finish behind the 4th place team in the Pacific. That's what it's amounting to, right? You have Vegas and Los Angeles. Los Angeles lost to Anaheim last night. That was a tough loss for them. Vegas has got a big game with Edmonton coming up, but Connor McDavid is banged up a little bit at Edmonton now that it's looking unlikely that they will catch Vancouver. They might rest McDavid. So you might get a chance to play the Oilers without McDavid if you're Vegas. But Nashville has to finish ahead of the other one, right? Somebody's going to either Vegas or Los Angeles will be third in the Pacific. That takes them out. So then you take whoever's left over. Does Nashville finish ahead of that team? So how much do you push, or how much do you maybe rest some guys? That's what they have to sort of talk about today. You know, it starts with Saros. Like, how many do you let Lankinen play? All 3 of the last games, or 2 of the 3, or just 1 of the 3? You get back to back. He's going to play 1 of the 3. But how do you want to have Saros ready for game 1? They end Monday. They can't start before Saturday, and they may not start until Sunday or Monday, right? So there's going to be plenty of rest after game 82. So these are all the things they can now start to plan now that they know they're in.
I would say, you play the starters the next game, and then you sort of back off a little bit, knowing that, for one, the travel, if you do have to go and it's not Dallas and you do have to make that travel, it's good that you get basically after the last game of the season, you get 4 or 5 days off before the playoffs start. So how much rest is too much rest? I think that's
another good question.
Balance
it's another good question.
How much rest is too much?
Fill
rest?
Those days
exactly.
Do you have like an inter squad scrimmage almost to try to stay sharp?
You got to have something just to keep the guys engaged.
You got to stay sharp somehow.
Yeah, because it's a delicate balance if you want fresh legs going into the playoffs, but also we saw this team look coming out of the All-Star break. Look too ready.
It's always a challenge for every team. I think is if you get into that situation. So these are all good questions, and these are all fun questions because you're in this tournament. And we should stop for just a moment. When they were, first of all, before the season, this is why I loved what the crowd was all about last night. You could just feel it. They've fallen in love with this team.
Yeah.
And even though John Hines and those teams in the post Peter Laviolette, the post Stanley Cup playoffs, like there was the Stanley Cup run in 2017, which, everybody's going bananas, crazy. That hit new heights that still, we were it still blows your mind today. Then the following year, they were a better team. They were just a flat-out better team from start to finish. It's the President's Trophy winning team. Number 1 overall seed. And then they lost a really tough Game 7 to Winnipeg in the second round. That series could have gone either way. There's so many what-ifs in that series. But then that begins the frustration, right, of, we got to get back there. We want it. We could taste it. This team should win it. They won the division the next year, but they weren't quite as good. Then they lost in the first round. Like, what's going on? And then the pandemic, and then the coaching change. And I think the fans got frustrated, right? The fans were like, what happened to the – wait, I don't want to lose in the first round.
That was so fun, what we had.
Yeah.
Can't we just capture that lightning in a bottle again?
And I don't want to say they fell out of love with the team. The reason they care so much is because they love the team. But there was frustration. There was, I don't know. But now you can just really sense the belief and it's re-energized. That's what's great. And before the season, I didn't know what to expect. I don't think anybody knew what to expect. Most of the Greg Wyshynski, to his credit, did say, okay, I got receipts. I did say the Predators would make the playoffs. And kudos to him, right? But he knows. He's one of the few that actually did predict they would go to the playoffs before. But then I would challenge people, what were your thoughts on November 18th when they were getting ready to play the Blackhawks? And you look at the bottom of the overall standings, it was Predators, 5 wins, 10 losses. Blackhawks, 5 wins, 9 losses, 5 wins, 10 losses. Yeah. They were at the bottom. They were the bottom 2 teams. And where'd they come from that? And all the arguments we've had, arguments out of love, right? Willie, what's the plan? All that stuff. And people would say, you got to blow it up. Blow it up. You go. The only way you can win it is you got to be bad. You got to get the first pick. You got to rebuild. Just think about all the special moments, regardless of what happens from here, right? This has been a fun season, a fun team. You don't get that when you break it down. What's the most fun a Blackhawks fan has had this year?
Connor Bedard.
That's all you got.
That's all you got.
And I don't think, and he missed several weeks, and there's been a lot of nights where even he can't do anything for him. It's been miserable. And it's been a long time. So 9 out of 10 years making the playoffs. It's just something you should not take for granted. And these memories that you get when you walked out of that building last night, even though they lost, I guarantee you people were saying, wow, that was a heck of a sporting event.
That was special.
Right? So you get that. You get that when you don't rebuild, and you get that with smart maneuvering where you don't just say, hey, we need to be bad for 4 or 5 years. And then maybe we'll just draft high and hopefully over time we'll just build back a good team. There's a lot of ways it can go wrong if you do that, and you sacrifice 4 or 5 years, whatever it takes, of fun, right? Tanking doesn't always work, and it's a big price to pay.
And I'm glad that you bring that up, kind of how we've gotten to this point over the last few years. Because I wasn't here in 17 and 18, but man, do I feel like I was. Just the amount of times that we've talked about it, the amount of times that I've heard callers and texters and listeners and Predators fans talking about how special and electrifying and just, how special the city felt. It was on fire at that point in the 17 and 18 seasons. This is the third trip to the playoffs that the Predators have made since I've gotten here. In 2021, and they turned things around late in the season, and they went on that winning streak in the month of March, and they found themselves in the playoffs. And even though they made the series against Carolina really interesting, and it was, just coming off of COVID, so this was the first time that Bridgestone Arena really got to be packed for the first time in a while. It felt really fun and really exciting, but I don't think anyone really expected the Predators to beat the Hurricanes in the first round of the playoffs.
Yes.
Big underdogs. It was fun, but everybody knew, okay, this was fun while it lasted, but, let's move on to the next season. 2022 against Colorado, it felt over before it started. It felt like I was at Game 4 in Nashville, and you're down 3 games. Saros is hurt. It felt like a Tuesday night in November at Bridgestone Arena. It honestly kind of felt a little bit depressing that it wasn't a playoff environment. And of course, the Predators missed the playoffs last year. But this is the first year that I've been here in Nashville that I feel like there is real hope with this Predators team as they enter the playoffs. That there is a real feeling of confidence and excitement about the fan base for this team, of what they can do. And even if the Predators do get bounced in the playoffs, if they have a competitive series against Dallas or Vancouver, or whoever it ends up being, even if it is a first-round exit, I feel like we all and all of the Predators fans are going into the playoffs with a sense of hope and excitement for the future. That's the first time I felt that since I've been here. It feels different, and it feels like you're on the precipice of something really great. But how did we get here throughout the season? Because it wasn't very long ago we were talking about trading UC Saros. We were talking about,
think about that.
Predators fans were so confused. Why?
Hello. People wanted to
D-Base
stoop.
was the one all throughout.
Exactly.
Said, do not tell me about trading UC Saros. I don't want to hear it.
I mean, now you looking like a genius for this. But, go back to signing Ryan O'Reilly and Gus Nyquist. Fans were like, I don't get it. Why sign old guys
What
to
exactly
a long
are they
term?
doing?
What are they doing? So how did
mushy
we get...
middle. You don't want to be in the mushy middle.
Exactly. We were tired of this. We're tired of being just good enough to get in, but not good enough to make some noise. So how did we get here? It hasn't been very long since we were having those conversations. Barry Trotz answered that question when he was on with Stillman and Company, on with Jared and Stillman and Company yesterday. How did we get to this point? This was Barry Trotz.
Why did it happen? Why did this team come together? Why did this team go on the run that it had? Why is this team as competitive as it is when you were preparing us for the possibility that it might not be? And what do you attribute that to?
I think what it is a couple of factors. You've got good coaching, you've got good leadership, and you've got good culture. And those three things were brought together with a common focus. We became a pretty good hockey team.
He makes it sound very easy. Good coaching, good leadership, good culture. Sounds easy, right? It's a lot more difficult to do than it is to say. So I have to give Barry Trotz a lot of credit because it was his vision of the culture and him executing, getting the right players into this locker room to build that culture. I have to give a lot of credit to Andrew Brunette, what he inherited, what he came into, and what he's been able to turn around. And I have to give a lot of credit to the leaders in that locker room and the young guys in the locker room. buying in to what the culture is, buying into what this team can do. It's really hard, I think, to do what the Predators have done, to start where they were, to make the turnaround that they had when there really were no expectations for this team. And now they find themselves in the playoffs. It's a massive credit from top to bottom.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure they had their own expectations, but their expectations probably were a little bit different from our expectations, and I'm meaning the fans, because they're looking at this team and they're seeing the transition and the moves that were made last season, toward the end of last season, and they just probably thought, listen, if as long as we don't finish at the bottom, we're not making the playoffs. Let's make some moves to get some guys in here. Let's relieve ourselves of some salary in regards to trading away players, but this team thought different, as a lot of teams do think. Regardless of what the locker room looked like, every team each and every year at the beginning of the season, they feel they have a chance. Regardless of how the locker room looks with players, they feel they have a chance. And I'm sure that's the way Nashville felt. But I think it started even before that. This was a collaborative effort. This was like from organization-wise. This was organizational cooperation, and it didn't start this season. It started last season toward the end when you started to see Barry more involved in what was going on toward the end of last season. David could have been like, listen, I'm just going to do it my way, and when you get your hands on this team next season, you can do it your way. But he didn't. That was a collaborative effort. The moves that they made toward the end of the last year, I think it was a collaborative effort between David Poile and Barry Trotz to make sure he has at least he can hit the ground running. He hit the ground running. He had already made the moves that he was going to make. He made a few more, but he set the team up last year to have success this season. He didn't wait until the end of last season or the beginning of this season. They started last year. So this was a collaborative effort amongst the organization. And I'm talking David Poile. I'm not even talking just Barry and Coach Bruno, who was everybody, because they're at this point because of what they did toward the end of last season that afforded them the opportunity to be in a position that they're in now. At least that's how I believe.
It's a good point. Laid the foundation.
Yeah, and I think he did it without costing them the future, which is still the goal, is as Ryan O'Reilly and Gus Nyquist and even guys like Forsberg and Yossi start to age a little bit, that you have that next wave coming up. That's the critical part of this long term. And so in doing all this, he didn't sacrifice the long term. That's another thing that I think David Poile, it was great to see him last night. He was there. He deserves to share in the moment live, right?
Absolutely.
He stayed in the background, right? More than he ever has, obviously, before. He's always been the GM, but he's kind of chosen not to sort of hover over everything, which is really classy. But I love that he was there last night, because he could have said, hey, this is my last kick at the can. I can throw all the future assets. Who cares about the future? I'm out of here in a couple of years. But no, he set the table for Barry Trotz. And they have held on. All those trades they made last year, a lot of them, they haven't even used the picks yet. Like Tanner Jeannot, who hasn't really lit it up for the Lightning. They still have the Lightning's. 15 years. Yeah, that's right. They have the Lightning's first-round pick, not this coming summer, but next summer. Like, they still haven't used that. So they're going to have assets going forward. They haven't traded any of their first-round picks, a fifth-rounder and a sixth-rounder to get Beauvillier and Zucker. The only real short-term price they paid was the buyout of Duchesne and I'll give you Johansson for half price. And they're going to have to take a little chunk out of their salary cap the next couple of years. That's the only thing that was a step backward. Everything else they've done is advance the team and with an eye on the big picture with assets and prospects and all that stuff. All those guys in Milwaukee are just getting more and more experience and getting a little more maturity under their belt.
And when have you ever said, man, I miss Matt Duchesne? Frankly, I have not said that once. I have not said that once this season. All right, that is how we're starting. The Predators clinched the playoffs last night. This is the happiest I think we will ever be after a loss. because it wasn't a loss. It was a loss, but you still clinch. So that's where we're starting. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. Want to get your reaction to Predators clinching the playoffs. Know where the team goes next. Do you play the veterans? Do you rest the veterans? What's the perfect balance there? Your reaction to the Predators making the playoffs considering where this team started. And plus, coming up next, what Barry Trotz thinks is this team's greatest advantage as we head into the playoffs. We'll get into that coming up next. Caroline, Willie, D. Mace. We're brought to you by Zen Sports. Start earning cash rewards on your bets today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and in Tennessee to bet.
All right, let's talk Loan Pronto. The engine is there for you to be able to use your home's equity to get into a better financial situation if you're looking for cash and cash in a short period of time to A, pay some bills, credit card bills, car loans, personal loans, loans that have a big interest rate that's piling up on you, so you're paying more money than you need to be. You could get that to zero and have a better interest rate through your home's equity. And if you're a homeowner in this area, the chances are your home's value is way up. You can use that to your advantage. So call right now because the Express Equity Line of Credit through Loan Pronto is the engine that can make it happen pain-free, stress-free. It used to take a long time, a lot of paperwork. That's not the case anymore. They can get you approved in a short period of time and have that cash in your bank account ready to attack your financial plan. Maybe you just want to start a home improvement project in the next couple of months and make your home even more valuable. This is the way to go. Loan Pronto, 615-499-5780. 615-499-5780 or go to loanpronto.com. That's loanpronto.com. NMLS 166-1781, subject to lender approval, equal housing lender.
Caroline Willie D. Mays for broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. Probably the most exciting loss in recent history, because Predators do in fact lose last night in overtime, but it is an overtime, and that's all that mattered. All the Predators needed was one single overtime point to clinch, and they got it. Predators fall to the Winnipeg Jets 4-3 last night, but they are, in fact, headed to the playoffs. Even though a couple of months ago we were talking about trading the goalie and selling at the deadline, even though at the beginning of the season, Barry Trotz said, be patient with us. It's going to be a process. Predators find themselves back in the playoffs, 9 trips to the playoffs in the last 10 years. I do want to get into what Barry Trotz said about what he thinks is the team's greatest advantage as they head into the playoffs. But first, I want to get into your reaction, your thoughts on the Predators clinching the playoffs, where they go from here, your expectations as we get into the playoffs. Our phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. 615-737-1025 is the phone number if you want to get in on the conversation. Adam in Portland is on the line. What's up, Adam?
Hey, Caroline. So you can look at it two ways. Like, you can look at it like, what did you think coming into the season that this team was going to do? But I also look at it like, and I know you used to talk about it a lot on your old show, like, what is this team and what is the expectation of the team? And that they are a perennial playoff team. Like, they are supposed to be in the playoffs. It's the same reason that Kelly Harper is not the Lady Vols coach anymore. It's the same reason Cal's not at Kentucky anymore. Like, there's certain expectations for these places that weren't being met. And the Preds, while they were struggling, what have we learned about them? They are crazy streaky, like super ability to go on the biggest streak ever. They're also able to lose 4 or 5, which gets you eliminated in the first round. So I don't know what to make of it. I don't think it's good enough just to get there. I think you have to be competitive and probably win a series to call it a good year. Like, honestly, like that's what 18 games did to me. It raised the bar. It raised it back up. So I don't think just getting there is enough.
Touche. Thank you for your call,
Thank
Adam.
you, Adam.
What do we think about it? To call it a successful season, Predators have to get to the second round of the playoffs.
No, at least for me, that's not the case. This team, they got into the playoffs. They played some really good hockey toward the latter part, the second half of the season. Did the first half of the season start off, not ideal? Absolutely. But the second half of the season, they picked it up. Them going on an 18-point, streak didn't make me think, if they don't make it out of the first round, then it's a disappointment because of what I saw. No. It's like this team fought, and they finally figured it out amongst the team. They fought to get in the playoffs. They're in the playoffs. Anything now is gravy. Do I want them to go far in the playoffs? Absolutely, yes. But you can't say that it's a disappointment for a team that many didn't even pick to make the playoffs. This was sort of that quasi rebuild season sort of for the Predators in many eyes. But they quickly, got rid of that moniker, so to speak, of starting over. And they played good hockey in the second round, but it doesn't make me think, now they have to get past the first round in order for this season to be a success. This season has been the regular season. They had a successful regular season. Now can they have a successful playoff season? Because this is the second season. Well, this is the third season. The first season was the first half of the year. They didn't do well. Second season, they did really well. This is the third season for them. It starts new again. Now what can they do in the playoffs?
They're going to play. Now the odds are pretty overwhelming. Either Vancouver or Dallas. Those are the two best teams point-wise in the West. I don't know that people would put Vancouver as the best team on paper, but they, like the Predators, have been a bit of a surprise of where they are.
Yeah.
So the Predators are going to be an underdog against either one. So you're saying you have to pull an upset in the first round to have a successful season? I don't think that all adds up. There's going to be a lot of really good teams that lose in the first round. That's just the way it works. If you look, let's just take, for example, the Florida Panthers, the defending Eastern Conference champions, are going to play the Maple Leafs in the first round. Those are two really good teams. One of them is going to lose in the first round. Mm-hmm. You've got Winnipeg is going to play Colorado in the first round. Those are two tremendous teams.
Yeah.
One of them's going to lose in the first round. So this is how it works. I think what I feel like this Predator team, knock on wood, let's just hope they can take this group in, because Saros getting hurt right before the first round against the Avalanche, that kind of eliminated any hope there. But hope is a key word, because even with Saros, they would have gone in as a big underdog against a juggernaut Avalanche team, where you felt like it would be a huge upset just to win the first round.
Yeah.
They're going to be an underdog, but I feel like they've got the tools and the ingredients that they're bringing to the table that they haven't had probably since 2019, in the first round of a playoff series. And in 2019, they just flat out got beat. But I thought they were a good enough team. They weren't playing great going into that series. It didn't feel quite as powerful as they had the year before going in, where you felt like this is a team that could win the whole thing. But this team is coming on. I had a discussion with my son earlier. He was like, how good do you think this team is compared to 2017? Right? Because 2017, they were the 8th seed. They were the second wild card. But I felt like that team had the tools to make a run in the playoffs, but maybe I was in the minority. And I looked at this team this year as not as good as that 2017 team. But now, the more I watch them, the more I see them play together. I don't necessarily think they're taking a back seat to that team. I think it's comparable. So all that to say, it's a complicated thing that he's bringing up there, because it's so hard to win in the playoffs. But his expectations have changed from the beginning of the season. I think that's a big feather in Barry Trotz's cap, that he's raised the bar.
And your expectations should change throughout the season, frankly. If you have Stanley Cup expectations at the beginning of the season, and then you have several key players get hurt, and who you thought was going to be great isn't great, well, your expectations change. So it's fair that your expectations for the Predators changed after they went on a historic run. I get it. But to say that the season is not a success if you don't get to the second round of the playoffs, I think is a little bit too black and white. I think it's a little bit too short-sighted. I think you need to add a little bit of nuance and a little bit of context there. Because I don't think that all first-round exits are created equally. Let's say the Predators get Dallas, because there's a very high likelihood that they will play Dallas. There's also a very high likelihood that the Dallas Stars win the President's Trophy. The Dallas Stars are looking like one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. If the Predators lose in a very competitive 7-game series to the Dallas Stars, and the Stars end up going to the Stanley Cup final, are you going to say you're unsatisfied? Are you going to say that was an unsuccessful season because you lost in 7 to one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NHL? I don't think that's fair. Now, that's not, if the Predators go out and, roll over and poop their pants and lose in 4 and get swept and it's not even close, that's a completely different conversation of how'd you go from an 18-game point streak to beating some of the best teams in the NHL and looking pretty darn good doing it, to all of a sudden now you can't win in the playoffs. Two completely different discussions and two completely different feelings if those two things end up shaking out, although the result is the same. Although the result is still a first-round exit.
They're having a good season. It's a good season because they put themselves in a position to make the playoffs. They're in the playoffs. So any team that's in the playoffs, it's a good season. Now, some teams probably were picked to have better records, but they didn't, but they still end up getting in the playoffs. You got in. That's the success, because it's hard to get in the playoffs. And the Nashville Predators fought their tails off to get position themselves to get in the playoffs. Now, the playoffs, to Adams, to what he was saying, disappointment or not, the playoffs is a whole different season. The playoffs is separate from the regular season because we've seen teams win the President's Trophy and get put out in the first round.
So last year,
we've seen teams that win the President's Trophy and don't make it to the Stanley Cup. We see teams that barely get in and they end up going on a roll. Nashville Predators, 2017, when they got in, they went on a roll. So to me, the playoffs is a different season. Now, if you want to, say if they don't go far in the playoffs, okay, but that's a whole different season. My expectations for the Nashville Predators were, listen, if they put it all together, they can make the playoffs. Mm-hmm. They put it all together, they make the playoffs. But I'm not going to sit here and say, well, if they don't get past the first round against either Dallas or Vancouver, then it's a a failed season. It's not a failed season. Those are two of the top teams in your conference. It wouldn't be a failed season. But like you said, if they go out and they just get mopped and mollywopped, then we got we need to talk about something else.
I don't expect that to
exactly, and I don't expect that to happen.
I think there's
either.
a feeling that that's not going to happen, but anything can happen. We know sports. But if they had loaded up, because let's be brutally honest here, other than Spencer Stastny and Luke Evangelista, who are both rookies, it's not really a youth movement what they've done, right? They're setting the example for a wave of players that's coming up through Milwaukee, but those guys haven't been the reason that they are here. It's really O'Reilly and Nyquist and great seasons from your star players, Yossi and Forsberg, and then great stories on the bottom of the roster like Sherwood, who was awesome last night, McCarron, Cole Smith, Mark Jankowski. Those guys have played great roles. Those are great stories.
Tommy Novak
is a nice, that's a good story too.
27 years old?
Yeah, he's a little older than a lot of the, he's an old young player. Like he's not a lot of games under his belt, but he's not exactly young. But if they had loaded up and you were like, this is the last kick at the can for a veteran team and what happens next year, then I would be disappointed if they go out in the first round. But you feel like, okay, they still have this group and nucleus that can grow together for the next couple years. So this isn't just like a 1 year fix-it kind of thing. It's a first year in hopefully a process of the next few years being stuff where you can get excited going into a season. Like next year, I would hope that there's more than a few people picking the Predators to make the playoffs because they have raised the bar.
And they're going to be underdogs no matter who they play in the playoffs. But Barry Trotz feels like they have an advantage. We'll get into that coming up next. Plus, we've got a bunch of phones, so we are right to you coming up next as well. Caroline Willie D. Mace, hey, score big this spring with Lee Company and the Nashville Predators in the 10K Power Play giveaway. Enter for a chance to win a Kohler home generator or $10,000 toward Lee Company Home Services. That's right, a Kohler home generator or $10,000 toward Lee Company Home Services. Go online to leecompany.com/giveaway to enter. That's leecompany.com/giveaway in the 10K Power Play giveaway. Contest entries are accepted until Saturday, April 20th. Lee Company, all you need.
Let's talk Lee Company a little bit more. The Predators have a back-to-back coming up. They've got 3 games left in the regular season. It starts Friday and Saturday against the Blackhawks on the road, and then the final home game of the year in the regular season on Saturday against Columbus. Lee Company is going to be there on the journey throughout, as they have been all year, with our Nashville Predators coverage. Lee Company is a proud sponsor of Nashville Predators hockey. You'll see their display all over Smashville if you go down there. And they want you to know they're ready for you anytime you call that number, 615-567-1000. Keep it in mind for stuff like general maintenance, indoors, outdoors, whatever the problem is in your home, they can cover it for you. And that nucleus of your house, your air conditioning system, your heating system, plumbing, electric, they're ready for you on that. And they've got a year-round plan called the Home Maintenance Plan, which we do at the Donick House and have for a long time. And that helps us stay on top of it because they're calling us to have our annual checkups of our systems to make sure they're running properly and efficiently. And when there's repairs that need to be done over time, you get discounts on those repairs. It's a great relationship. Lee Company. Go to their website, leecompany.com, or call them, 615-567-1000.
I think we have a good chance because of the fact that every night we've been playing playoff hockey, and when it comes to it, there's no pressure on us. I mean, whoever's playing us, all the pressure's on them. I'm not saying that just to be coy or to start the playoff talk already, but it's true. No one expected us to be here except us. And, we're probably not going to be a favorite in the series or any series we play. So, let's play free. Let's play with no pressure, and let's go after someone.
That was Barry Trotz on Stillman and Company yesterday. Caroline Willie, D. Mays, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Also, just a quick programming note, we'll hear from Ryan Callahan, Titans head coach. He will host a press conference at 12:15. Kind of previewing the draft, looking ahead to the offseason program. So we'll hear from Brian Callahan, offensive coordinator Nick Holtz, and defensive coordinator Denard Wilson. So we will carry those press conferences live and in their entireties. Jonathan Hutton will join us at 1 p.m. Well, we always, at least I always call Barry OBB, Open Book Barry, that he'll probably tell you things that a lot of other general managers or coaches won't. Hearing that there from Barry, you don't hear every general manager say, look, we're going into this with no pressure. We feel like we could be playing with house money. If we play Vancouver, they've got pressure. If we play Dallas, they've got pressure to get to the second round of the playoffs. So Barry Trotz feels like that's in their corner, that they can go into the playoffs and play free, play without weight on their shoulders, and that plays to their strengths.
I'll go back to something he said in the very first press conference when they signed on the first day of free agency, Nyquist, Shen, and O'Reilly. They had some other moves that day, but those were the three big ones. And he said on that day, these are serial winners, et cetera. And somebody said, well, when you rebuild, like his big thing was like, we're going to show these young guys how it's done. We're going to set a standard. We're going to create this culture that this is how we do it. And that was what prompted the cancellation of the Las Vegas trip. Ultimately, like, we're not playing to the standard that we're setting here. We've got standards. This is the way we do it. And somebody at that press conference said, well, the rebuilding and, what exactly are you doing here? He goes, I didn't say we didn't want to win. So that caught my attention right there when he said, nobody believed we would make the playoffs except us. So internally, he thought that they had enough to still be competitive and get to this point, which is not easy. I think a lot of people, the misconception by some is, well, 16 teams make the playoffs, everybody makes the playoffs. That is, you want to tick Barry Trotz off and strike a chord? Throw that at him, and he will have an answer ready for you, because it's not easy. It's not as easy as people think to make the playoffs, especially 9 out of 10 years, right? Ask Columbus, ask Detroit. Ask, you can go down the list.
Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago. So I think he this vision that he had, he deserves so much credit about how he did it, because he wants to set the standard for these young guys that he knows have a chance to be good. And Milwaukee's really banged up right now. They've had a bunch of injuries. That 19-game winning streak was awesome, but they've hit some bumps in the road, which is probably in the big picture good for them going through adversity. But I don't think he's jeopardized their future by doing what he's done this year. That's what I like. And there's also, because of this, you get the benefit of all the fun we're talking about. You have exciting nights every time they take the ice. It's significant. It's a meaningful game. What's next? Can they win in the playoffs? And that's what he just set the table for, is the next chapter. Hey, they got no pressure on him. Mm-hmm. They've got no pressure on him, but you've got a lot of guys in that locker room that have won a lot of playoff games. That's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, it's refreshing, I'm sure, for a player as you're entering the playoffs. And I don't know if the guys are listening to Barry when he comes on our station with Jared. I don't know if the guys are listening to him or not, but I'm sure some of these things gets back to them. And when your GM says the pressure's not on us, it's on them. Nobody but us expected what we see now. Mm-hmm. So why not just go out there and just play? No pressure. I'm not sitting here and evaluating guys and saying, if you don't do well in the playoffs, then you're not going to be on this team next year. No, just go out and play. I've already set the table. I've taken the pressure off. I'm the GM. I've taken the pressure off of y'all. I've taken the pressure off the head coach. Continue to coach the way you've been coaching. Continue to play the way you have been playing players. And with that, it's almost like he's guaranteeing, like, we'll win our share of games in the playoffs. Now, will it ultimately end in winning us a series? I don't know, but we're going to win our share of playoffs. But make no mistake, the pressure's on them to beat us. It ain't the other way around. We continue to move through the playoffs. It's a great story for the NHL. It's a great story for us. But if they lose in the first round, it's a bad story for them, so they can't afford to lose in the first round. We just go out there and play. Player hears that. He's like, okay, good, great. Let me just go out there and just play the way I've been playing. Raise it up a little bit, but for the most part, just play with the confidence I've been playing with the last half of the season, and we'll be good.
And I don't think that the team's necessarily listening, but I do think that that's probably the sentiment in the locker room, because the Predators, at least it feels like whenever their backs are against the wall or they're down or whatever it might be, or they're playing against a great team or they're on the road in a difficult environment, for the most part over this stretch of the last 2 months or so, it feels like they love the pressure.
Yeah.
Or it feels like they don't even feel it at all. It kind of feels like, well, we'll just play our game. Last night is the perfect example. You're down 3-1. You need one single point. Did it ever feel like they felt overly stressed or anxious or too much pressure? And like Michael McCarron, big sexy, threw the gloves off, threw a couple of punches, and it was like, all right, we're playing our game now.
How can you be called big sexy but then want to fight all the time? you can't. Who you fighting today?
I think
sexy?
we have to credit. We'll have to ask the originator of that nickname, Matt Benning. Matt Benning, who was on the Sharks. Now he's been injured this year, but he was the guy that coined the phrase that just kind of caught on with the team. And now it is endorsed by his wife, Olivia.
Exactly.
She's like, okay, we're okay. Like, yeah, call him Big Sexy.
Affectionately known as Mrs. Big Sexy.
Mrs. Big Sexy. But that was a big moment last night. But that, I think, lends itself to the collective identity of team, that relentless. Like, there is something to be said. Like, the analytics can't tell you how tight-knit the group is. But it
shows on the ice.
It shows on the ice. And when McCarron knocked him down, even if he didn't knock him down on one punch, which was pretty cool, like that was a big win, a lopsided win, the crowd, and then he senses this is the time to make the move. They're down 3-1. The crowd's going nuts. And then he gives it another, on the way to the penalty box. Let's go. It was just that authentic, like you can't put a price on that. Like, what is that worth? That doesn't show up on the stat sheet.
Analytics doesn't show that.
Yeah, that meant something.
Yeah, you felt it. And I wasn't at the arena, but I could at least watching the game. I felt that just a flip switched. It was just like, okay, game on. We're into it.
Yep.
And I'm sure, Willie, you could attest that the crowd was probably into it as well.
Yep.
All right, coming up next, we're going to hear from Brian Callahan at 12:15. A little bit of an off-season program preview, and I expect there to be some draft questions in there as well. So we'll hear from Brian Callahan at 12:15, and coming up next, what we want to hear from Brian Callahan, what we expect to hear from Callahan, Nick Holtz, and Denard Wilson. We'll get into that coming up next. Caroline, Willie, D. Mace. Hey, Chase and Big Joe, have your chance to qualify to win a pair of tickets in the Eurostone Club to see Jeff Dunham this Sunday at Bridgestone Arena. This contest is brought to you by Green Trees Company, a family-owned cannabis company and dispensary providing high-quality legal THC products for anyone seeking medicine, relief, or wellness. Located in Hendersonville and a new location in West Nashville and available online at greentreescompany.com. Tune in tomorrow between 9 and 11 a.m. for your chance to qualify to win. Caroline, Willie, D. Mays, 1025, 1063, The Game and The Game Nashville app. We're streaming live on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook Live every single day. And we're broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. So we'll hear from Brian Callahan, Denard Wilson, and Nick Holtz, of course, Titans head coach and defensive and offensive coordinators, here in just about 10 minutes or so. And it's a press conference on the offseason program. Of course, the Titans are starting earlier than other teams in the NFL with a new head coach. You start the offseason program about a week sooner than the rest of the league. But I do fully expect there to be draft questions peppered in there of, what they want to do offensively, how they want to build this team. What do we want to hear from Brian Callahan?
I just like hearing him talk. I like hearing what he's about, learning more about him and the coordinators as well. So I don't know if I'm looking for anything super specific here, but to me it's just a general sense of let's see what his presence is about. Let's kind of file away some of the things that he says and kind of use them as we go forward here, just to kind of see what his vision is. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like we're referencing things that Andrew Burnett and Barry Trotz said in the very, very first press conference, right? But it's been interesting to watch those themes be put into play, because I think that's the goal of any coach, is you want to build that culture.
Yeah, you do. I mean, what more can we hear that will, change the way we think or what we think about this team headed into the draft? I'm sure he's going to be very coy about things. I think he's going to try to keep it more so to, it being our first day of, organized stuff, even though it's not mandatory. I'm happy to have the guys back in the building, met with some guys. They can't throw the football or anything else. So it's basically just working out. So I'm sure he'll try to, as best he can, use his talking time to really talk about the off season and what they're expecting and what they want to accomplish in the off season. Will they say something about the draft? I'm sure, but there's nothing that I want to hear, because they're not going to tell us nothing that's going to have any meat on the bone.
They can say a lot without saying a lot.
Yeah, they can, but I think they're going to try to keep it to this portion of the off season. They may obviously there's going to be questions asked about the draft, and they're going to answer them. But I think they would try to keep it more so of what's going on now, what guys are here, what they're expecting from guys this off season.
Yeah, I first of all want to know who's there.
Yeah.
I fully, wholeheartedly expect Will Levis to be there at the very least. And one thing that I do want to hear is, we talked to Tim yesterday, Willie, before you were able to hop on when you were at morning skate. I asked Tim, what should Will Levis be doing right now? And he said essentially asserting himself as a leader, asserting himself as I'm the guy, something he wasn't able to do last offseason when Ryan Tannehill was in the building. So I do want to hear from Brian Callahan, like, what's Will Levis been up to? What kind of growth do you feel like you've seen him make over the last couple of months now that he is the guy?
I can tell you he was at the Predators game last night, so that's one of the things. He was in the building. He was in the Predators building. So maybe he's catching a little fever here.
Was he shotgunning a beer on the Jumbotron?
No, I don't think so. But
maybe that's for the best.
Well, Taylor Lewan maybe hasn't gotten to him yet.
Yeah, maybe.
Remember Marcus
maybe
Mariota?
We'll earn that right to shotgun a beer.
Mariota was in front of the offensive line, who collectively shotgunned. I think Taylor Lewan shotgunned the beer through a catfish.
The luge, right to the
The look on Marcus Mariota's face was like, okay, these are my guys.
What did I just get myself into?
Okay, so maybe Chapter 2 is coming. 2.0 is coming with Levis. Who knows?
And I do wonder, are there any sort of smoke screens that we're going to be taking advantage of today? Because I saw, 2 days ago that Chargers tight ends coach was talking about, we want to be an offensive line-centric team. Like, oh, do you now? Like, I don't think that was put in there by accident. So I do wonder, do we hear Brian Callahan talk about how great these wide receivers are? And then that's a smokescreen because they're just going to take Joe Alt at 7. So a couple of things to look for there. We will hear from Brian Callahan when we get back. Caroline, Willie, D. Mace, we are brought to you by Zen Sports. Start earning cash rewards on your bets today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and in Tennessee to bet. Titans head coach Brian Callahan is up at the podium, so we'll send it over to him now.
It looked like, and you start at the very basics. You make no assumptions that even though these guys have all played a long time, we started with teaching how we're going to get in the huddle and how we're going to break the huddle and then how we're going to line up. All of those things, it's a very step-by-step process. We don't skip steps, systems, and as well as getting to know the players. So we're making sure we have plenty of time for each position coach to have their meeting time so they can set their expectations and standards and just get to know who these guys are. I mean, this is our first exposure to them in a football setting. And I think it's important, as I've stated multiple times now, that the relationships we have with the players is an integral part of how we're going to operate. And so you have to work to build those relationships. It's a process and it takes time. And, that's what this time of year is for.
What was your very opening message to the guys first time in front of them?
Really two things. I think that I said it in my opening press conference too, and two critical factors that we want our team to be when you turn our tape on is relentless and resilient. And they got that message the first day. It's a huge part of what I believe in. And then the other part of it is just some very simple things that we have expectation-wise. I don't do rules. I don't have a lot of things that they need to abide by. But, I want guys to be themselves. I want guys to be on time, and I want to protect our team, and that's really what I live by. And so that's sort of the first opening message that they got. We'll talk every time I have a team meeting, usually once a week at this point, on what some part of our culture that we want to make sure we emphasize. So it's a slow process. We're not racing against anything to get to all those things introduced, but the opening message was certainly that we want to be a relentless and a resilient football team.
How maybe has the attendance been so far, and if assuming it's good, how maybe encouraging is that guys are excited about what's coming up and maybe the new regime?
Yeah, there's been great energy with all the players in the building. Even as guys were filtering into town over the last 2-3 weeks and showing up and working out, I just felt an excitement. Anytime there's change, you can handle it one of two ways. You can be disappointed by it, or you can be excited and ready to embrace whatever comes your way. And I think these guys have done a great job of embracing the newness of it all. These are always fun, man. I never know what's going to happen. But our guys have done a great job of embracing the newness and the excitement of what's to come. And I think that I've appreciated that from them. And I think as you get to talk to them as the weeks go on, you'll get their perspectives on it. But I felt really good about the start we've had this week.
Is the attendance good at this point? How much does it matter to you that everyone, or as many people as possible here?
Yeah, we want everybody here if we can have them, but it's a voluntary program. We can't make anybody be here. There's no ramifications or repercussions to not being here. And so guys have places they work out, people they like to be around. It doesn't stress me out too much. We'll coach whoever's here. Eventually they'll all be here. They have to be at some point. So the guys that don't show up, that's on them. It's not a thing I get worried about or mad about or anything like that. They handle their business and we'll be together when we're together. But I've been pleased with the attendance. I've been happy that the guys have been here, the guys that are here. And, if someone misses a day or two or misses a week, misses 4 or 5 weeks, it doesn't really matter to me at this point. We're going to coach as hard as we can, as much as we can for the time we're allotted, and whoever's here is going to be here. But I've been very pleased with our attendance so far in this first week.
You have a rough number or percentage on what that is?
No.
Obviously a big time for Zach right at the beginning. What's maybe different or unique about his philosophy, and what do you want him conveying to the guys right out of the gate?
Just the style that we're going to work with in that space, in the performance space. You got a really great staff. It's a numbers-wise a heavier staff. You got 6 on the staff plus Lauren and the nutritionist, so you got 7 people in the performance world for us. And I just love their plan. I love their energy. It's an old school. There's old school elements that have to be a part of that. You still have to do hard things. You have to lift hard. You have to condition. But then there's also the science factor of as making sure we're doing the right things when we're doing them, what the loads are. There's a lot more that can go into that. I'm not a performance coach. I don't know all the details the way that he does. So at some point, maybe you guys get to talk to him. But there's a science part and the management part that filters in with the hard part. And I think that they do a great job of mixing that process together.
Will the guys notice a difference, you think, right away there?
I would hope so. You'd have to ask them. I don't want to speak for them, but I'm personally very excited about what that looks like so far, and the plan that they've presented and put together that we've had meetings about, and how this is going to go for phase 1, 2, and 3, and into the season and training camp. So really, really excited about that group and what they've done there.
For Levis, how do you go about that process of like making him establish himself as the leader? Like, do you pull him aside, pour more time into him, or like how do you do that?
I want Will to be him. He's got to do it in his own way, and you can't make people do anything that's outside of their character or doesn't come across as genuine. And I think Will does a really good job of staying true to who he is. And there's obviously things along the way that I think are that I'll think are important, and I'll make sure that I convey those to him. But I'm not going to ask him to go be anybody that he's uncomfortable being. I need Will to just be the best version of himself. And he's got a job to do as the leader of the offense, as a leader of the football team. And I think he understands that. And I think that's the biggest part, is understanding what your role is, and that you have to be visible. People have to see you. You have to make sure you're building the same relationships that I have to build as the head coach. You're building them with everybody across the team, because the team needs to see you and ultimately have a relationship where they believe in you. And I think that obviously went a long way doing that last year. In his time that he played as the starter, I think he started to realize how important it was. I've been very pleased with his demeanor, his actions as he started the offseason program. And again, we're in our first few days, but really excited about where he's headed in that role. And so again, we have a lot of resources here. I told all the quarterbacks the other day that one of the unique parts about playing quarterback in the NFL is you have a staff of people that have a ton of experience. We've got guys from all over the league on both sides of the ball. Use our intellectual property, ask them questions, talk to guys, and if you can find something that helps you, there's a lot of people here that are willing to do that. So I think that he understands that there's a seeking nature to where he's at right now, as well as trying to find out all the information he can from every which way he can find it.
In terms of that, with Will being a young guy, how important is it to try to find that balance between still learning what's going on and learning what his role is going to be, versus having to assume that leadership role?
Yeah, it's a two-pronged process. It kind of happens simultaneously, but if you ever were to ask anybody that plays what comes first, and obviously the performance comes first, and so he's going to pour into learning a new system, learning what's asked of him, how to execute at a high level, and in his operation of learning, he can help get the information of the other guys on the offense, and that's where you start to take on a leadership role. But as a leader, you always got to make sure you're taking care of what you need to take care of first, so that your example, at the minimum, is what you want people to follow. And I think he's done a really good job of that. But there's an element where he's got two things going on. He's trying to build relationships and be a leader, as well as learn an entirely new way of doing and playing football than he's been accustomed to in his first year. So he's got a lot on his plate.
When you talk about him doing things his way, from what you've seen so far, what is his way? How would you describe his way?
Just from what I've seen so far, and again, I'm still learning Will every day that goes on. But he's got an intensity and an intent to every time he walks in the building. I think you see that in his play. When you watch him play, you see that intensity, that fire that he's got. That's not manufactured. That's how he is. He's got a way about him that is driven. I think he wants to be a great player, and he puts the requisite work in. That part's been fun to see. Just as you see him in the offseason, he went out to California to work with some people. He's very determined to improve his game, and I think that part, you have that part, you got a chance to do a lot of really cool things. But I've seen that from him in this early portion. He is front and center. He takes notes. He asks questions. He does all the things you'd want to see early in the process of a guy that's trying to improve his game and get better.
How beneficial can it be? We saw with Will Levis last year in D-Hop's relationship, and just D-Hop being that veteran wide receiver. Now you add a guy like Calvin Ridley in free agency. How beneficial is that to a guy like Will Levis, who's only entering his second season?
It's hard to probably understate the help that provides, where you have two really veteran players that have experience in the NFL. They've done it, for lack of a better term. And when you're a young player, sometimes that helps, because they can come to him and have the conversation about how they run a route, the technique, they're probably much more apt to be able to communicate that to him than he may be to communicate that to them because of their experience. And to have experienced players around a young quarterback certainly helps, because they're not necessarily always learning the same lessons together. There's some things that maybe Calvin's been through with his quarterbacks in previous places that he can share an experience or a story that may help that process move quicker than if you got two young players trying to do it together and sort of finding their own way. These guys have found their way. They're really proven players, and that's always going to be an advantage for a young quarterback.
First time we talked to you since Snead is signed. How big of an acquisition was that? How you like maybe the secondary as it stands right now?
Oh man, I my feelings about L'Jarius is as having to had compete against him. He's such a fantastic player, and the mentality that he brings to the defense, and you pair him with Cheeto, two guys that are really physical, really aggressive. I think they changed the whole demeanor of what you ask in the secondary and how they play. And I think when you add Roger into that mix as well, the fire that he plays with as a nickel, that's a really good group of corners that play at a high level and demand the same standard. And I think that's what you're looking for ultimately, guys that play like that, but then demand it from everybody else around them. And man, I played against L'Jarius enough times to have an immense amount of respect for how he goes about his business. And I think you guys got to see a little bit of it in his press conference, but he is a fantastic person on top of it. So I really feel like he's a huge addition to our team, both as a player and as a person in the locker room.
How do your days work right now with OTAs, with draft meetings, with top 30 visits?
They are busy. We start at 8 a.m. with our players. Right now, currently, with the way the phase one is constituted, our offense meets and our defense lifts, and then after a 2-hour period, we flip, and that keeps us at our 4-hour day. So I'm in as many of those football meetings as possible. I have a team meeting to run on Monday. I was in the special teams meeting Tuesday. I run all of our installation meetings for the offense, and then when that's over, I go right into defense and listen to Denard do his thing. Usually get some lunch, and then I'm probably lined up to meet with whoever's in for a 30 visit, which has been at least one player a day for what feels like the last 3 weeks. I don't know if it's actually been that long, but it feels like it's been a while. We've had a constant flow of these players coming into the building. I meet with those players when they come in, and then in the afternoon we're in the draft room, and our coach has just finished reading their draft reports. Today will be the last day within the last 2 days of that. So I probably get to sit down at my desk sometime around dinner time, and then I start my prep for the next day. So they're long days, but it's fun. I've enjoyed every second of it, but we're full. I mean, my time is pretty well divided up, and there's not a lot of free time, and it's a lot of work from kind of minute to minute over the course of the day.
Let's go. What's the most important thing for you out of those top 30 visits? What do you need to hear or see?
Just the same thing as always. We watch the tape. The tape's been graded. We know what the player is on their tape, but we're trying to get a feel for the person and ask the questions. And some guys we know very well about their character, and it's more of a confirmation. And some guys we're bringing in to find more out about who they are as a person. And you just try to have every bit of information you can get and gather on the person, because the tape is the tape. You grade that, but as much background information as you can get, you try to get. Some of these guys we've had scouts and coaches at the pro days. We've had the 30 visits. We've had the combine time. We've spent a lot of time on these players to make sure that when that moment comes, if that's the player we pick, we're very comfortable with who they are, both as a player and as a person. So it's more about just getting to know them as opposed to anything real football or technical. That is a part of the day. Don't get me wrong, but for me, it's a huge part of what kind of people are we bringing in.
What do you get to start your off-season program a couple of weeks ahead of other teams? How much of an advantage is that giving you, especially in these early parts as you're meeting these players, a lot of them for the first time?
It gives you an advantage. We chose to start our off-season program. We could have started last week. We chose to start this week just because it marries the weeks up better as it goes along. As you know, there's a handful of teams that started this week. A couple of them started last week, but the off-season program as a whole, it helps if you just start this week to match it all up. It's a huge advantage because this first week is, like I said, it's like an orientation. They're trying to get to know us. We're getting to know them. There's a lot of procedural things that are new for the players here. The coaches are new. The relationships are new. So, that extra time is a huge help. So when everybody starts in the NFL next week, at least we've had some time to, get the beginning stages worked through, and then hopefully next week we're starting up and we feel like we're right on pace with the rest of the teams in the league. But it's a long process, and every extra minute helps. And we're sort of in a little bit of a sprint between now and the start of the season with every other team in the league, and we're trying to do the best we can to catch up to the teams that are established and make sure that we're ready to play in September.
As you go through that process, like with the prospects and even in the draft meeting rooms, like how do you personally approach guys who have so-called off-the-field issues or baggage, character concerns?
You find out what it is that is considered a character concern. There's, I think, a lot of these guys are 19, 20, and 21-year-old kids. I think about a lot of the things that I did when I was that age, and I don't know that people would have, not that they were bad things, but yeah, I like to be around my buddies and go out and go to a party and do that. I mean, those are all things that these guys do, and sometimes they get unfairly knocked for some of those things. And some of them have real life issues that they're working through, that have real difficulties in their home lives growing up, and those are things that they have to work through themselves that are part of the equation. But I think you have to really make sure you're judging the kids on the right things and doing the homework on the background and making sure that you're not making any assumptions about what a college coach told you about it when the scout went in November to visit. So you really do your homework and making sure that if a character issue is considered a real character issue that that we don't want to absorb into our locker room, that we know that it's legitimate and one that we're not going to take a risk on, or maybe it isn't that. And the perception is that there's issues with somebody and they're things that we've worked through and feel comfortable with. So that's what this process is for. And that's why we spend the time that we do with all these players and the 30 visits and on the Zoom interviews. And there's a ton of time invested into making sure that we get whatever those issues might be ironed out. And whether they're real issues that have to be dealt with or they're things that maybe aren't as detrimental as the perception might be.
How do you kind of assess the defensive line situation beyond Jeffrey Simmons? Obviously, Autry and Tart were big parts of what they've done here in the past. Both those guys are going.
Yeah, it's a position that's still in its building phase. We got guys that we feel good about, but just like any front, offensive or defensive front, you're never going to turn down good players that can bolster that. It always is going to start and end there. If you can play physical in the trenches, you're going to have a chance to be a pretty good football team. And so those are always areas we're going to look to add players, even when we might have what we think is a good front, which we do. There's always going to be opportunities to keep adding to it, because all I know is when you play against a team that seems to kind of come at you in waves and every player they put out there can play, that's a lot of stress on an offense from my perspective. So, the more guys you have that can rush from inside and outside, the stouter you play against the run. That's an area that you're always looking to keep adding good players to.
Ryan, you're doing well.
I am, thank you.
Good, glad to hear that. From there, how much does what you guys did at free agency, as far as players you signed, impact how you view the draft, if at all?
Oh yeah, it's a huge part. When you start the free agency process, thankfully we have a scouting department that works their tails off and have done a really great job of getting the starting process. And when you get into this, we were late because of the hire and all that, but you have a draft and you have a free agency, and so you target a lot of your free agency based on potentially what's in the draft. And so you might have some available defensive free agents. Like we felt like there was corners that we could go sign. And maybe there wasn't as many corners in the early parts of the draft that were of the same caliber. And so those two processes work simultaneously. And as you add players of need in free agency, which is what free agency is for, you want to add players you need to have at positions that are of need. The draft then opens up for you, and you're able to take a little bit more of an open-minded approach on what the best players are at those positions. You obviously always have needs that are in your back of your mind, but when you pick at 7 and you pick at 38 and you're picking at the high ends of these rounds, you want to be open and free to take ultimately what the best player is available to you. And so free agency is a good way to supplement that. The hope is in the future that we are drafting and developing and just signing in free agency with a little bit more discretion. We had to go sign a bunch of players this year, but the goal is to always draft and develop and supplement in free agency as it goes on.
I'm sorry, but do you feel what you did allows you to be free in that way?
I do. I feel really good about where we're at. I feel like there's going to be opportunities to draft some good players. you don't control what happens in front of you. And so as these picks go off, it allows you to be a little more flexible in your approach, and whatever that pick may be, we can find that best player for us in the process. So I do feel like the free agency has opened our ability to be more open-minded in the draft.
Still a couple of weeks to the draft, but will there be certain guys that you'll advocate for, fight for, stand for the table for, whatever you want to call it, and what's that process going to be like with Raymond?
I think you advocate and fight for guys when you have a really strong opinion, or there's a large difference maybe in the positions and where you feel like, as an offensive coach or a defensive coach, you feel strongly that you might need. But it usually doesn't work that way where you're fighting for much, because you prepare, you go through all the different scenarios. You work through every, there might be 50 different scenarios that happen in front of us at pick 7. And so you have to work through all of those things, all the contingencies. What happens if this player is there? What happens if that player is there? Would we be comfortable with this player over that player? And you go through all of these exercises at your picks, and particularly as the first and second round for sure, because that's a process you have to work through, so you're not surprised on draft day. So by the time we get to the draft, all these conversations have been had. People have said their piece. We've had the conversations about who we prefer, and ultimately when we make the decision, it'll be the Titans' decision, and that's everyone's going to move forward with that. So this is the time for all of those things, when people are coaches are advocating for guys they like, scouts are advocating for the players they like. You have conversations if there's huge discrepancies in the grades, and you figure out where that difference is, and you come to consensus on whatever player you're discussing. And so the process has been fun, but it's an enjoyable process. There's a lot of conversation. This is when all the advocating happens. And then by the time we get to the draft, we've cemented our plan for the most part on what directions we'll head based on what events happen in front of us.
How do you feel about where you are at tight end?
We need tight ends. We do. We only got 3 in the roster. We'll obviously take quite a few more than that to training camp. So that's a position of need just in terms of the numbers. Feel really good about Josh Wiley and his development. Feel good about Chig where he's at. We got 2 young players we're excited about, but. Obviously 3 tight ends isn't what you're going to take in the training camp. So there's going to be some spots to add, whether that comes from a veteran player after the draft, whether it comes from a draft pick at tight end, remains to be seen, but certainly need to add more than what we have currently. We'll probably take at least 5, probably 6 tight ends in a training camp. Generally speaking, that's usually where you're at. So there'll be some guys added to that room at some point.
You've been pulled a million different directions since you've been this head coach. What's the best part of this week and actually having a team in the building and doing the coaching part?
Just that. I love coaching football. I love being in the meeting room. That's where I feel like I'm in my element, and that's been the most exciting part. I love being around the players, and I've always maintained that the day the players come back in the off season is probably the best day of the off season, because you spend all this time in these meetings and you're with all the same people, and there's just a new energy when players come back in the building. That's what we like. That's what I like doing. That's what coaches like doing, is coaching football. And for me, that first day back and being able to be in a meeting room and talk football and talk scheme and be around the players, that's where I find the most joy, and that's the part I like the most. And so, to answer your question, coaching again is what it's made it feel the most normal for me. That's what I'm used to doing, and all the other stuff has been great, and I've enjoyed it. But coaching is what I like doing the most.
When you look at your group of wide receivers after adding Calvin to that group, how open are you to still adding to that room, and are there any skill sets or traits in particular that you feel like you might currently be lacking?
No, I think you're always open to adding to those spots. I mean, we have to have someone emerge for us at the slot position receiver when we're in 11 personnel. That's one that we got some young players I'm excited to take a look at with obviously Kyle Phillips. Mason Kinsey's been around here a little bit. He's shown his mettle. Obviously, Nick Westbrook-Akine has been involved in some of those spots over his career. So trying to find someone to emerge in that spot. You got guys that you're trying to always build youth and depth as well. And so those things are in constant flux. You're always trying to have another guy ready to roll. You need depth at every position. That's not just the receivers, but you're always open to those guys. And again, guys that are fast, explosive, and physical, you can't have enough of them.
As you've worked alongside like your father for the first time, like in the NFL ranks,
I guess what has maybe been unique or stood out about kind of how he evaluates offensive linemen and kind of what you guys need there?
Nothing's really stood out because I've known. I know how he operates. I know how he works. He's put in a tremendous amount of work. All of our coaches have in this process, and we started out behind. So we had to get an evaluation of our roster. We had to get an evaluation of the free agency. You had to get the evaluation of the draft prospects. They had to be, your reports have to be in. Coaches read our reports the last 2 days. It's been a tremendous amount of work for our coaching staff, and it's one that I appreciate tremendously. The passion and effort that they put into evaluating these players on the coaching side has been fantastic. My dad's been no different. I think if you ever got to see one of his reports and how he writes and the detail he goes into, it's something to behold, I guess is the best way I can say it. Incredibly detailed, has a great vision for what it looks like and how those offensive players fit at each position across the front. And he's seen a lot of it. He can draw on comparisons that not a lot of people can draw on when he's evaluating players. He might compare somebody to somebody he coached in 1998, and half the scouts are like, "Who's that?" He's just got such a wealth of experience in players and evaluating players that he's a huge asset for us. He's a huge asset to me personally with that position, because it's a hard position to evaluate sometimes and get right. And I feel like he's got a pretty good track record of being pretty spot on and how he thinks guys fit and what they can do well. So a huge advantage for us to have him, and a huge advantage to our scouting staff to be able to ask him questions and lean on his expertise.
In the building in the last week or two.
Say that one more time.
You've had some enormous people come visit in the last week or two. Does it ever get less shocking, and do you feel the need to get bigger?
Bigger is generally in football gonna usually be better. Especially when you're talking about guys up front. You want size and strength. And, I think, Denard says it sometimes, but, you want to get off the bus and look good too. Usually that's part of it. That means you've got a well-built football team. And so size and strength are things that you're always looking for, particularly in the trenches. Those are important pieces to playing NFL football, because sometimes at the end of the day, it's just simply are you able to move that person, and it simplifies it, but that's what it comes down to. And so I'm not surprised by it. I like that. I like the big, strong players are things that I'm a fan of. So when they walk in our building, I get excited, even though we don't get to recruit them and sign them to scholarships. We got to draft them, and you only get one pick in each round, or sometimes you don't have one. But those guys are parts of that's what we want. We want our team, when you look at us, to go, God, these guys are big and strong and physical at the places that they need to be.
In on the install meetings with Denard, leading the way there for the defense, not having, let's say, the history that you have with somebody like Nick, what have you learned about Denard in those meetings, and what kind of defense he's going to put out on the field? It's been great. Obviously, I've got some familiarity with Denard's style and where he's been. I've played against a lot of defenses that he's been a part of over the years, and so I have some familiarity with that part. But I think when you guys get a chance to meet some of these other guys, of Frank Bush and Tracy Rocker, and guys that have been around here, I know some people are familiar with them, but man, you want to talk about an energy and a personality that the defense has as a staff. That's been the most fun for me. The scheme is what it is. Everyone runs some versions of the same things to some degree. So it's the manner and how you teach it. And I think that's what's been really fun to me, is to watch these guys teach and watch their energy and see how they interact. That part's been really cool for me to watch. That's what means more to me. The scheme is scheme. We have all the answers. We have all the blitzes. We have all the coverages. But watching them teach how they do that, the technique, the fundamentals, the expectations, has been really cool to watch. And I think Denard's a phenomenal teacher. He's got great energy in front of the room. I was in there just watching his opening meeting, and I was like, man, I want to go play defense. Do I get to come? Do I get to be part of the defense too? So that part was cool. That was really fun to see.
Junior, is like you go through the process. Obviously, no work at the combine, et cetera, et cetera. Does it make it tougher for you to evaluate him, or do you just kind of rely on the tape?
No, the tape tells you the story. You always like to see guys, in person when you can. But there's a handful of guys every year, probably from now until the end of football, that are going to be in a position where them working out doesn't really do them anything more positive than not working out. You know, Marvin is probably going to be a top 5 pick, most likely, and no working out was going to change that. So I don't really, doesn't bother me, you know, when that happens. You obviously would prefer to see guys in person and work out, but if they don't, they don't. His tape tells you the story. He's played enough football to where you can get a pretty good evaluation. And then again, you meet with the person and you see why he's the way he is, and it makes a lot of sense when you do that. So, you know, there's going to be those guys every year, and this is going to come up probably every time we have these conversations. So it's just part of what the draft has become and the pre-draft process has become. So I don't really think too much about it. We just evaluate the tape.
Kickoff rule in the league, you know, the shift in technique for kick coverage and kick blocking. Do you want Bill involved in that process as far as teaching techniques to guys who maybe haven't learned those blocking techniques before?
Yeah. I think it's different. You know, that's you know, those special teams guys, they have a different way of doing things that maybe doesn't quite correlate the same way. There's certainly mechanics that they can have conversations about, but Colt Anderson, I think, will do a hell of a job teaching what that's going to look like. It's going to change. You know, the kickoff is going to be very different. There's some evolution and unknowns that are involved in that rule that I'm excited to see how it shakes out. You know, you got a lot of really smart special teams coaches that'll try to find every which way to make an advantage for their team. And some of it might be blocking technique. Some of it might be the personnel you use. Some of it might be the schemes in the return. And that part to me is exciting. It's unknown, so I don't know what it's going to look like. But there's going to be something new and exciting about it, and I think that's what the league is hoping for, is that there's some new excitement to a play that's essentially been dead for the last 2 years. And I'm looking forward to seeing what these guys come up with. Yeah, you got it.
Line Willie D. Mays. Hey, Preds fans, don't miss tonight's Smashville live show at Brewhouse 100 in Bellevue at 6 p.m. See your Predators star players up close and personal, plus get autographs and pictures. This week's special guests are Ryan McDonough and Luke Shen. Smashville Live brought to you by the Black Abbey Brewing Company and ESPN Bet Sportsbook.
When you look at your group of wide receivers after adding Calvin to that group, how open are you to still adding to that room, and are there any skill sets or traits in particular that you feel like you might currently be lacking?
No, I think you're always open to adding to those spots. I mean, we have to have someone emerge for us at the slot position receiver when we're in 11 personnel. That's one that we got some young players I'm excited to take a look at with obviously Kyle Phillips. Mason Kinsey's been around here a little bit. He's shown his mettle. Obviously, Nick Westbrook-Akine has been involved in some of those spots over his career. So trying to find someone to emerge in that spot. You got guys that you're trying to always build youth and depth as well. And so those things are in constant flux. You're always trying to have another guy ready to roll. You need depth at every position. That's not just the receivers, but you're always open to those guys. And again, guys that are fast, explosive, and physical, you can't have enough of them.
Notice anyone missing there? It was Brian Callahan who just spoke with the media.
Yep.
He talked a lot about a lot of receivers.
Mason Kinsey, Nick
Mason
Westbrook-Kinsey.
Yeah, I didn't even know he was still on this
exactly.
team.
Phillips.
I didn't know Mason Kinsey was still on the squad. Kyle Phillips. He talked about all these names except one.
No mention of Traylon Burks.
No mention of Traylon Burks.
No, he could be talking about guys to fill in the slot.
Slot position,
and he doesn't view Traylon as
a slot player,
a slot receiver. So I'll give the BOD there.
Uh-huh.
But I find that interesting.
But he had a long answer about both. Both not returning, because one of them was a free agent pickup. But he was ready with the long answer on how valuable is the relationship with DeAndre Hopkins, and now you've got another guy coming in that's going to Calvin Ridley. Long answer on both of those guys.
No Traylon.
So maybe it would have taken a specific question about Traylon, but I'm very curious.
Somebody should have asked a specific question about Traylon, because that's big in the framework of where is this receiver room. Are you counting, Traylon Burks, or are you not counting him? Like, are you expecting? Do you expect him to come in and compete for, a starting job, or just that third wide receiver position, or are you just like, okay, it's whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not in our thought pattern moving forward. You're not in our future, so. Whatever you do it, but we plan on doing something else. It was kind of odd that he did. Now, again, he was asked specifically about Calvin Ridley. He was asked specifically, I believe, about DeAndre Hopkins and how does that whole dynamic works. I guess if he was specifically asked about Traylon Burks, he would have gave an answer, but nobody asked about Traylon Burks. Mm-hmm. They asked about the slot position. And in his mind, the slot guys, Mason Kinsey, Kyle Phillips, Nick Westbrook-Akine. So does that mean he Traylon isn't on the forefront of his mind in regards to what they want to do with this offense?
If he was, don't you think you'd mention him? If you're mentioning Mason Kinsey, who frankly I didn't even know was still here.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah.
Is he on a roster? Like, does he need to be on a roster? Know. Is he just always in a case, like just break glass in case of emergency? Mason Kinsey is here.
He's always
if you
there.
Need one. Yeah.
It's like
what's his official status?
I have no idea.
Is he
but clearly,
practice squad, developmental squad?
He's here in some capacity. I mean, and I find it strange.
And by the way, I'm a big fan of Mason Kinsey. The guy works his tail off. He would do
100%.
anything to stay in this league and apparently on this team, because he's not going.
Apparently, he's still
nobody
here.
Nobody else is calling him to put him on a roster. So he's trying to make it happen. And I've seen him do some nice things out there. He's okay, but it's just interesting that he gets mentioned
and not
Traylon Burks.
And
in any capacity.
I would have noticed if he would have mentioned Traylon Burks, because Brian Callahan doesn't know how to pronounce his name. He calls him Traylon, and has ever since day one. And it drives me crazy every time he calls him Traylon Burks. It irks me. It gets under my skin.
Know your player's name first.
Well,
Traylon. No, I guess it's not his. I guess you don't consider him one of his players, because he damn sure didn't mention him when you were talking about the receivers.
Interesting.
Maybe he just
Very.
got stage fright. Maybe he just I don't want to
okay.
mispronunciate his name. I don't know.
I guess so. Yeah,
Nah,
when you
that
can't when you can't pronounce a certain word, you try to stay away from it. But damn, you could have said Burks.
I know. Right?
You could have just said Burks.
Or got T back there.
Yeah,
I was just making a joke. But
But yeah, that was kind of odd that he didn't mention Traylon. And see, this is the game, whether they plan it or not. This is what I don't like. Like, if he's not in your plans, let's make some moves to try to get him somewhere else so you can pick up a position or another draft pick in this year's draft or maybe even next year's draft. But playing these mind games, it's like it does nothing for anybody. To me, you just be upfront with the guy. Listen, and maybe they have. I don't know. Maybe they have. Listen, this is your year. If you don't show us something, you're not going to be here. You're not going to have a spot on this team. You do that to a player, and then see what their reaction will be in regards to their play or their practice habits or their workout habits. But don't just sort of kind of leave this thing in limbo or purgatory, and he not know, and he's thinking like, am I here? Am I not? I'm working my ass off. What's going on? Just be upfront with them.
And they maybe have had those conversations.
That's what I'm saying. They may have had those conversations.
And maybe they do view him as an integral part of the team moving forward.
Yeah.
But if they did, don't you think that he'd at least come up in the conversation whenever you're asked several questions about the receiver
Because you're talking about
position?
the receiver room.
And he gets several opportunities to bring him up. I think that's telling. I don't need you to, the silence is deafening there, at least to me. So we'll see. We'll see. Well, whether he's here next year or not, it sounds like he's at least not moving forward an integral part of the plan.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like based upon what, and again, he may not look at Traylon as a slot receiver. My thing is, just play a guy. Just play the guy. Play your best 3 or 4 guys, whether he's in a slot or not, because you're going to create a slot for an individual. Doesn't necessarily have to be the slot man. You can create a slot for D-Hop. You can create a slot for Ridley, which they will. You can create a slot for Traylon. So when you ask about the slot position, then is it just solely those guys that are going to be in a slot, the third receiver, or are we talking they're interchangeable?
Yeah.
Because if they're interchangeable, then Traylon should be a part of that because I can create a slot.
Why not?
I can create a mismatch. So
that's an important point, I think, is if there's a player that you think is in your best 11, you find ways to get your best 11 out there. Even though you have Ridley, even though you have Hopkins. And that is telling a little bit. Now, maybe they're just intentionally doing this and saying, okay, you're going to have to work.
Yes.
Maybe the previous regime, you were the first-round pick, and we try to create space for you. Now you have to create the space for yourself.
Take it.
And I don't have a problem with that.
I don't have a problem with that at all.
And I don't mind having him around.
But just tell him, let him know.
Let's see if he can do it. And if he can't, then we'll move on.
And if you can't, you've been given ample opportunity to show us that you can. We'll catch up with Jonathan Hutton, Hot Mike with Hutton and Withrow coming up next. We'll get his thoughts and reaction on Brian Callahan's press conference. Plus, we're just a few weeks away removed from the draft. We'll get Hutton's thoughts and approach on what he thinks the Titans should do with the 7th overall pick. We'll get into that coming up next with Jonathan Hutton. Caroline, Willie, D. Mays, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Look at the time. Look at the time.
Look at the time. It is Hutton o'clock. Hutton o'clock coming a little bit later this week because of the Titans press conferences. Caroline Willie D. Mays, 102.5, 106.3, The Game and The Game Nashville app. And joining us now, it is Jonathan Hutton of Hot Mike and Hutton and Withrow. Hut, always appreciate our weekly visits with you and appreciate you being flexible with us this week. We just heard from Brian Callahan, and we played a clip coming back where he talked about, the wide receiver 3, talked about Mason Kinsey. He mentioned Kyle Phillips. He mentioned Nick Westbrook-Akine. He talked about Calvin Ridley. He talked about DeAndre Hopkins. But the three of us, nor Nick, didn't pick up on a single Treylon Burks reference in like a 40-minute press conference from Brian Callahan. What do you read into that?
Well, he's like us. We don't think of Treylon Burks.
Bad news for Treylon Burks.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned he was asked directly about Treylon Burks at the combine, and it was direct on his opportunity and time to show something kind of thing. But look, I mean, Treylon Burks could be available via trade. I think that's, if we're just looking at pieces to this team that they would have available on the draft for a Titans organization that wants more draft picks this year. That's a spot where you feel like, I mean, when we've seen this, guys, you get a 3rd or 4th round wide receiver that can help you now for an offensive minded football coach. And you don't feel like Burks is that guy. I mean, maybe you flip him for a middle of the draft, mid to late round draft pick and go get another wide receiver if you need it. They need another young wide receiver on this roster. Maybe they take him in the 1st round. But that aside, if you're taking a wide receiver in the 1st round, Burks is now the 4th, or you see what I'm saying? That's interesting that he's the one receiver that he didn't mention, but maybe it was just by a complete coincidence.
Right.
But, I mean, if you're just rattling off your starting lineup, you're going to get to Burks fairly quickly, especially if you're going to mention Mason Kinsey.
It could be sheer and utter coincidence, but the fact that all of us kind of feel the same way, like, oh, yeah, Treylon Burks is on this team, that none of us really expect much from Treylon Burks this season. Maybe
he hasn't seen him. He's not top of mind. I don't know.
You mentioned the Titans taking potentially wide receiver in the 1st round, and I think that's on the table. Say Malik Neighbors falls to the Titans at 7.
Yep.
What would your reaction be if the Titans go receiver at 7 rather than a Joe Alt or an Ola Fashanu or addressing the left tackle position?
Well, so early in the offseason, I said I would go offensive tackle, free agency, wide receiver. I would go young in the draft. Mm-hmm. What we don't know is where they have these guys graded on their board. If they have one of these top 2 or 3 receivers higher than the offensive tackle, don't you? By the way, we've seen Callahan and the Bengals organization be in this spot too, where they could have selected an offensive tackle and they went Jamar Chase. That there was a distinct decision to be made there. And both players have been really good in the league. I don't have a problem with it whatsoever. If they're building for the future, DeAndre Hopkins is here for another year. They've got Ridley under contract for 4 years, and you've got an elite young wide receiver to pair with Will Levis, who they're going to sling the football with. They got to protect him. And the other aspect that we don't know, guys, is the Bill Callahan effect on the offensive lineman. If they draft offensive tackle at that spot, that is signed, sealed, and delivered by Bill Callahan. If they wait and address it later in the draft, that is signed, sealed, and delivered by Bill Callahan. That if he's the best offensive line coach in the NFL, and many regard him as being so, and he is excellent at what he does, they're trusting every single recommendation on that line that he makes. And that would certainly factor into any grade or any board that they're putting together. And as far as wide receivers go, we know this coach and how he opened up describing his offense. Unlike any other coach we've seen come through the St. Thomas Sports Park doors in Nashville since they moved here, he started by discussing the passing game. And I think that's something to keep in mind as we go into the draft here.
We're talking with Jonathan Hutton discussing the Tennessee Titans. Now, Hut, he talked about the secondary, Brian Callahan did, and he seemed very excited about the secondary, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
They have physicality to that room now, and it seems like the way he described it is this is going to be a more aggressive style of play on the outside, which lends me to this question. Because when he talked about the secondary, if you're going to be aggressive, you got to have people that are going to get to the quarterback very quickly. Yep. He didn't make any mention of, Caleb Murphy or anyone else. Do you think he's leaving himself open for potentially getting a pass rusher, possibly in the first round or the second round?
They need that. I mean, they need to add a piece there, Mace. But from your perspective and your career, the football's coming out faster than ever before, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's time to be aggressive across the league in that regard. If the football's coming out fast, if you're a defensive back, you got to be up on that receiver immediately. And I think the money that's been allocated to the defensive line to defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen, I think that's how you disrupt the quarterback initially. If the ball's coming out so fast, the edge rush, which is still crucial. Don't get me wrong here. I still want that elite pass rusher. Myles Garrett is elite. Micah Parsons, elite. We could go down the list here. I'm simply saying I want that to determine what they're getting. Autry, they lose what they're getting on the interior next to Simmons, and who they're pairing with on the outside. They have to add there too. And they've clearly had this plan where they've addressed some things in free agency that's allowed them some flexibility, but also has centered in on some positions that we know they need to go with. And pass rush is certainly got to be addressed. That front has to be addressed. But they definitely, absolutely trust their number one corner.
Mm-hmm.
And what a difference an offseason can make in the mindset of that. And we also know just through just the watching defenses with Wilson at the helm of the secondary and coaching that position, he wants to be aggressive. He's been through those defenses that have been, and Baltimore and Philly have certainly had good pass rushes there. That Titans have to have it. But I think because the ball's coming out faster than ever before, while there's still the great wide receivers in the passing game and the odds are stacked against you, I mean, how long have we heard? You guys certainly have heard it more recently.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners, callers, text line, chat on YouTube, with everyone complaining about how much space is given from the defensive backs to the wide receivers. That's changed now, and that's good for the Titans.
Yeah, it is. Now, looking at, I think Brian has done a good job, as well as Rand. In regards to the this year's draft, I think they've done a really good job at being coy. They haven't sort of tipped their hand one way or another, because listening to him in this press conference, he basically left himself open to drafting anybody, because he said, listen, we earmarked some guys we wanted to go after in free agency. We supplemented, but we want to build through the draft. But he didn't specifically say we're getting a tackle, we're getting a receiver, we're getting a corner. He left this thing basically open, which is a good thing for a young coach, to keep everything sort of, hidden, behind the curtain. Because last year and the year before, there were a lot of things that were not hidden. There were a lot of things that got out of that building that's not getting out of it this year.
And a lot by Diana Rossini, huh?
Yeah.
But let me. You have a great perspective on this, Base, because I haven't thought about it this way. I've been geared towards offensive tackle and wide receiver at 7. They've had to address other positions, because if they trade down, if they get a haul for a quarterback, there's not really any guarantee that those top players at those positions are there when they select. So the question is, do you draft based on need, or do you draft based on this dude is one of our keystone players in the first round moving forward, regardless of need? What if it's another corner? To your point, it looks like they've got their defensive backfield set, so to speak, right now. But for the future, if you've got that guy there, again, they've done their due diligence, and I would be mentioning or alluding to the fact that, we could take any position because if you trade down in the first round, let's say that just hypothetically, you trade to 12 with Minnesota. You trade down again if you want to. You get more picks if you're going to address a specific player and it's not necessarily need. I think as far as the first round goes, this is a franchise that's got to get better in addressing the fact that they've got to get elite talent regardless of want or need. They've got to hit on these guys. And I mean, I'm following my board, but I'm following the best player. It doesn't have to be quarterback, but it doesn't have to be wide receiver or offensive tackle either, based on the discussion we're having. If you trade down because, Minnesota is in love with J.J. McCarthy at 7, they're in a great spot given the fact that the first 3 picks seem to be quarterback. And then we see who really wants to wheel and deal after that, if Arizona is going to give up Marvin Harrison Jr. in exchange for a trade up by one of these other teams. Or will the Chargers actually trade down for a team that is in big needs for wide receiver right now? And then, all of a sudden the Titans are on the clock. Their phone's going to be ringing, and I bet it's for a quarterback.
Jonathan Hutton's with us. Jonathan, that was a long press conference we just heard from Callahan, but I feel like we're getting to see what he's about. The more you hear about him, he's so conversational with the media.
Yes, approachable.
Yes. And so what do you think that translates to? Like, I try to think about why is that good? Like, other than our needs as media, right, where you ask a question, you're actually going to get a thoughtful answer, right? He's going to try to answer your question, whether as opposed to Mike Vrabel, who wanted intentionally, I think, and this is not –
played games.
Right. He wanted to keep everybody on their toes, keep everybody on edge. He was going to give you short answers. He wasn't going to get philosophical. But what does it mean when it comes to Sundays, I guess is the question. We don't know.
Well, I think from the media and fan perspective, I'll just speak from a personal aspect here. I don't have to agree with everything going on in the world, but I need to understand the other argument or the side, the conversation. I think the conversational and an approachable ability of Callahan here so far allows those questions to somehow be answered. You don't have to agree with the answer, but you can at least understand the perspective or the decision. I don't know if we've always been getting that with some of these coaches that have been through the Titans organization, Willie, and that leads to a ton of speculation. I don't know if you get a ton of speculation with Carthon and Callahan. I think that's good. It could be bad. I think that's good because you at least know where they're coming from. It could really piss you off, I guess. But down the road, we'll see. So I do think that's a positive. I think it also shows he's organized. He listens to the question and gives you a thoughtful answer. I think that means on game day, everything has been thought out for the most part. There's a plan. There's a way to go about it, and he's not rushed. And he's not. He doesn't seem like he's. It doesn't seem like he's faking it. And I do think there are young coaches that come across as that a little bit because they're trying to act like they know what they're doing or they know something about behind the scenes that we don't know. And I think Callahan knows what he doesn't know. And I think that's a huge positive for a coach that is calling plays for the first time and he's a head coach for the first time. He's more polished in that regard than maybe what I thought he would be.
And I think the flip side of that is right now we're in the easy ones, right? These are the easy press conferences. When it gets tough is when I think that style is going to be tested, and if he can stay consistent, that will be big.
Hey,
but
Willie?
There's going to be some tough times, right? And he saw his mentor go through it in Cincinnati and survive. So I think it is something that can work, right?
And Zach Taylor's very much like that. Sean McVay very much like that. And you know who's been like he's the most like Jeff Fisher in that regard of the coaches we've seen since Fisher. I don't know. Just thinking about this in real time, Fisher would stand at the podium and just go. He would just have a conversation with him. That practice is wide open. I'm not saying the practice is going to be wide open here, but I do think Fish he did try to explain some things. Now, maybe he was doing it for different benefits or the PR moves, which he was great at. But I think there's more of a give and take there than maybe what we've seen from Wisenhunt or Vrabel.
Talking with Jonathan Hutton. Last one from me, Hut. I was looking at an article on ESPN.com. Bill Barnwell highlighted what he thinks every team should do with their first round pick. Stay put, trade up, trade back, just from that perspective. His breakdown for the Titans was trade up to get your left tackle of choice. We talked about that with Tim Hasselbeck yesterday. He said if there is one left tackle that the Titans have zeroed in on, then you have to leapfrog the Chargers to get that left tackle. What say you?
I mean, I want to know what Barnwell said 2 months ago when he was writing about the draft. Things have to change on purpose. Yeah. Because they've got to have new content. You can't just repost the same articles in the same mock draft. So I don't read into the mock drafts as much until we get to their final ones. But it just comes down to what's the gap between the two tackles at the top of this draft?
That's the question.
And that's what we don't know in their draft room.
Mm-hmm.
If one is far and away the best one, then you try to leapfrog. But if not, you to me, I hear one or the other. I don't hear just one name. So I think they're regarded as being pretty close. Now, system-wise, that also plays a factor. What Bill Callahan thinks is the biggest voice in the room with this. I don't know if you guys agree though. Like if they're I'm just surface level, I'm not necessarily trying to trade up a couple of picks for one guy if I've got a grade that's similar to another player that's right neck and neck with that guy.
They don't have enough picks.
And by the way, maybe the Chargers take the other player.
Yeah, maybe the Chargers take a receiver. Mm-hmm. They don't have receivers.
Or they take the other tackle.
Right.
That if everyone's talking about Alt, what if they don't draft Alt?
Yeah, I think it sounds to me like a move that would be made out of fear, when I think this team has far too many needs. Mm-hmm. And far too few picks to be giving them up to fearful, zero in on one player.
I'm fearful of them at left tackle right now. I get it, but I feel like these guys are very similar in their overall ability and elite level at the position. And also, by the way, there are other players that they'll have on their board graded with them for top 10 eligibility. And if wide receiver is one of them, I don't rule that out.
I'm with you. Hut. You're the best. Appreciate you for stopping by, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Yeah, always a great conversation, and you guys have a great rest of the week.
I appreciate it, Hut. You too.
Thanks, Hut.
All right, we'll react to what Hut had to say there. Plus, Hutton brings up a gap between Joe Alt and everyone else. Dane Brugler has his beast. His not a mock draft guide, his draft guide. He breaks down every single prospect in this year's draft. So what's his breakdown of Alt and everyone else? We'll get into that coming up next. We'll get into your thoughts as well. 615-737-1025 is our phone number if you want to get in on the conversation. Caroline, Willie D. Mays, we're brought to you by Zen Sports. Start earning cash rewards on your bets today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and in Tennessee to bet.
Let's talk about Zen Sports, people. The betting weekend is coming up. And listen, we got NBA games. We got just about everything. I know some things have dwindled down a bit, but we still got hockey out there. It's ramping up. The playoffs are about to get going, so you got to make your bets. Why not do it with our partners in sports and their which is the new sports book in Tennessee that brings sports betting to a whole new level, and I mean that literally. When you sign up for Zen Sports, you'll automatically earn up to $1,000, no danger first wager. If your first bet loses, you will be reimbursed for the amount of your bet up to $1,000. Zen Sports offer true odds on all parlays and boosted Same game parlays for all Tennessee sports teams. That means boosted up to 20% over other books in Tennessee. And there's even more good news, people. Zen Sports offer a one-of-a-kind VIP reward program. If you qualify, you'll earn monthly comps at sport events, concerts, you name it, even sport book bonuses. The VIP program is by invite only. So if you feel that your Zen Sports play qualifies for the VIP consideration, check out the program details and apply at zensports.com/VIP. So what are you waiting for, bettors? The daily same game parlay boost go quick. So get going and download their app at zensports.com today. That's Zen Sports, where betting just got better. Remember, gambling problems, call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 years or older to bet in here in Tennessee. And the no danger wager limited to plus 500 odds to qualify. Boosted, people. Odds are derived from equivalent parlays bets offered in Tennessee. And like I said, to do all of this, you must be 21 years or older.
Caroline, Willie D. Mace. We're broadcasting from the Busy Bee Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Game Nashville Studios, home of the $99 yearly Beehive membership, where the buzz is always about great service. So we just caught up with Jonathan Hutton, appreciate him for stopping by, and he brought up the key question that we've all been asking, that we've all been wondering, and Titans fans are wondering, and that is, what truly is the gap between Joe Alt and all of these other left tackles? Do you feel comfortable in taking an Ola Fashanu at 7, let's say, if hypothetically Joe Alt goes to the Chargers at 5? Can you feel good about taking a guy like Ola Fashanu at 7? It's based off of their evaluation. What other evaluations are there? So Dane Brugler put out his beast, and it truly is a beast. It's like hundreds and hundreds of pages of teeny tiny font of evaluation of draft prospects. And he ranks draft prospects at each position and says, I think they've got a first round grade, a third round grade, so on and so forth. So I went straight to the tackles to see what Dane Brugler's evaluation was of the tackles. Now keep in mind, Dane Brugler's evaluation could be different than Bill Callahan's evaluation. And Bill Callahan's evaluation is the only one that matters. But it seems like it's a consensus that Joe Alt is the best tackle in this year's draft. This was Dane Brugler's evaluation of Joe Alt. Says, overall, Alt stays light on his feet with the big man agility, body control, and instinctive recovery skills to become a high-level run blocker and above-average pass protector very early in his NFL career. He projects as a first-year scheme-versatile starter with the pedigree to become a cornerstone player for an NFL franchise. He's a Jake Matthews in a Nate Solder's body. Jake Matthews is a 10-year starter in the NFL. He's been in Atlanta. He's been the left tackle in Atlanta for forever. We'll go on to Ola Fashanu, the evaluation of Fashanu. Dane Brugler writes, overall, Fashanu is a work in progress as a run blocker, but above average in pass protection because of his body quickness, anchor versus power, and attention to detail. He projects as a long-term starting left tackle in the NFL with Pro Bowl upside. So both sound like they could be your long-term starter at the left tackle position. Both sound like they can be your left tackle for the future. Mm-hmm. But it does sound like there is a considerable difference between Alt and Fashanu.
Well, I'm sure there is. The way that, people are talking, Alt up, like he's of any one of the prospects, he is the most NFL ready. He is the guy that you plug and play. He is, what many consider a blue chip player. So the way they have been talking about Alt, it does separate him from the next guy. But like you said, how far is the separation? What is the gap between he and Fashanu, he and Latham, he and any other tackle that's projected to be a first rounder? That's the question. Obviously, Titans know the answer because they have all these tackles ranked. And they just may have it closer than what Dan has it or anybody else has it. That if we can't, get Alt, then let's pivot and get another one of these tackles. The telling sign will be is Alt get drafted, and then they move out of that space, and they keep moving. That tells me that whoever they saw as that second tackle, it was a gap between there. There was a gap. Now, if they stay put, then to me, there's no gap. They feel the second tackle is just as good as the first tackle, who is Alt. So I guess it depends on, if Alt is drafted prior to them getting their turn at the board. And if he is, then how far do they drop down? Because if they drop down 5, 6 spots, in their mind, well, at least it's telling me they still can get their guy, the guy who they want.
Or they don't view
the tackle,
the other tackles as the seventh best prospect.
So they're trying to get as much, equity as they can, draft equity as they can by continuing to move down. I think it'll be a telltale sign once those first 5 or 6 guys go, and if people make trades, then what is it the Titans are going to do? Are they going to stay put and draft who they think is possibly the second best tackle, or are they going to move down and potentially still get that guy who they feel can be the left tackle for the next 10, 12 years?
My thought is they've put themselves in a position where they really need to come out of this thing with a left tackle. They've done everything. and in some ways they've telegraphed it, right? They've addressed all of these other needs, but that is the glaring need. So if something goes awry, in other words, they don't get the first pick of left tackles, and they have a considerable gap in their own evaluation. Like that's one evaluation that you just read. There could be they might have them neck and neck, but if they in their mind think there's a big gap between Alt, let's assume Alt is number one. If the second guy is considerably lower graded in their mind, then what do you do? That's the what if to me. That's the one where you have tough decisions to make, because that's when you might consider just saying, look, we might have to go another year in search of our true long-term left tackle, and we got to live with that. And that may not be great this year, but once again, this is where I go back to my theme. This is an exploratory year. There's not everything riding on this year. You've got to build. The real deal is you want to build a good contending team in the next 2 to 3 years. This is a building year.
And the question, too, is if it's, let's say, Alt goes at 5.
Right.
And Neighbors falls to you at 7.
Okay. Well,
you take Neighbors?
I think you've got to do that. Like, I think.
I would have no issue
And you would
with
have
that.
to just say, look, we have to just find a way to get by at left tackle and just do what we can. Take a flyer on a guy later in the draft, and it will not be ideal. But that's where I come back to this fundamental question. Are you willing to not have a great team this year? Probably no matter what you do, you're not going to have a great team. You'll have to overachieve to have success. And that would be fine if it happens. But if it doesn't happen, you have to be on a bridge to the following year being ready to go. Because then you've got those 2 years left on Levis's first contract are huge. Like that's when you have the ability to attack a salary cap and have resources. But this draft has to be good. And ideally, it's probably, if you like Alt and he's at 7, that's the way to go. But if it doesn't, then you've got decisions to make. You can't just take a guy at 7 at left tackle because he plays left tackle if you don't think he's worth the 7th pick.
You don't reach for a left tackle at 7 if Malik Neighbors, who many view as the 4th best prospect in this draft behind the 3 quarterbacks. Now, we can debate that all day long whether he is or not, but I'm just saying that's the evaluation of a lot of people, is the best non-quarterback in this draft. Well, if he falls to you at 7, you'd be crazy not to take that player, even if it's not a player at the glaring need of left tackle. Another thing that I wanted to touch on here was one thing that Hutton brought up. The X factor of Bill Callahan. And I don't even know how much you can really call it an X factor because it's was established and well-respected left tackles, offensive line coaches in the NFL. Whatever the Titans decide to do with the offensive line, if they do decide to wait until 38 to address left tackle, and it's Patrick Paul from Houston, who many believe will be there at 38, that I think has to be a decision that's endorsed by Bill Callahan.
Yeah, it's going to have to be because Barnwell has him as a 2nd or 3rd round. He has a 2nd or 3rd round grade on him. So, if you don't get your tackle in the 1st round, will there be enough tackles taken in the 1st round that a guy like that falls to you? Or, will the draft be thrown off by some moves made at the top and you're still able to get one of these top 4 or 5 tackles in the first 2 rounds, whether it be in the 1st round or the 2nd round? Because, Willie, you're right. They're leaving themselves open to do just about anything.
I think they should be.
And they should be, because it's not like, they plug some holes via free agency, but they want to develop the team through the draft. So it's telling that they didn't go get a left tackle. They didn't go get an edge rusher, like a bona fide edge rusher. What they did go get is a receiver and 2 corners in a center. So they deliberately went out and got that. They didn't deliberately go out and get a defensive end or a tackle. So to me, say if someone does take Alt, I think it leaves them completely open to do whatever they want. Because now you've taken that pressure of me, in a sense, it's pressure, but it's not, of drafting Alt. Now you draft Alt. Now I can Now I'm open for business for one, because now I can move down in the draft.
Could also say, well, now we no longer have the privilege of taking that left tackle, so what do we do?
Yeah, and you're right. The guys that we have under Alt, maybe they don't see them as top 7 picks. So let's move down in the draft. And then they see how the draft is going, and they may even move down a little bit more, knowing that if we move down 2 or 3 more spots, those tackles that we were looking at and evaluating, they're all still there. And I'm talking like the top 4 or 5 tackles.
Yeah.
Everybody's there except probably more than likely Alt and maybe Fashanu. Those 2 guys are gone, but the other 2 or 3 that have first round grades, they're still here. So we can move back enough, build up the equity in our draft, get more draft picks, but we're still able to get the guy that we feel that will fill the void at left tackle for us for the next 10, 12 years.
All right, coming up next, the Predators clinch last night. All they needed was 1 point, and they got that 1 point, and then they lost in overtime. But it was okay because they clinched the playoffs anyways. But now we've had the conversation. We've heard a lot from our callers and texters about now that they're in, what's the expectation once they are playing in the playoffs? We'll get into a bunch of your thoughts on that coming up next. Caroline, Willie, D. Mace, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
Caroline, look at look at it.
Hey, this is D. Mason, and you've heard me tell you about Dr. Jeffrey Lodge and his staff at Cool Springs MD for some time. I've shared how they've helped with imbalanced hormones and how they offer a comprehensive weight loss program that addresses the root cause of weight gain. But now, I want to tell you about a new laser they offer called Empowered Laser. Believe me, I did use it, people. With this laser, Dr. Lodge and his Cool Springs MD can help you turn back the clock and take control of your body. And who doesn't want to turn back that clock? That time, and who doesn't want to take control of their body as they start to get a little older? Learn about this amazing new laser and how it stimulates their Kegels in 20 minutes, women. The only laser indicated for mixed urinary stress incontinence. And hear about the tone feature. It's a tone feature here, and this is why I was using it for my abs, people. I'm trying to get those summertime abs right now. I think I got 2 abs right now. I need 6 more, people. So I'm going to keep on. I'm going to continue to use this feature. It's a muscle stimulator that increases the muscle production and tone in your stomach, which I'm using, thighs, love handles, arms, and more. Dr. Lodge and his team are ready to help you turn back that clock and take control of your body with the new Empowered Laser at Cool Springs MD. So go ahead, make your appointment, check them out, and visit their website at coolspringsmd.com today to get connected.
I know you would have liked to win, but you guys get the points, you clinch up the playoff berth tonight. Just what do you think of that accomplishment for your group, I guess?
First of all, I proud of the process that we believed in and the confidence we had and trusting what we do. And we don't always get rewarded for it, but we did tonight. Obviously, it was a big point to get. I love for the home crowd, especially, with the McCarron fight. I thought really got them going, and they kind of carried us through the third period. It would have been nice to get them a win, but again, just the resiliency our group showed, and like I said, the confidence. And we were going to have it easy. Unfortunately, that's just the way we are, and we don't mind it hard. And tonight was hard.
That was Andrew Burnett after the Predators' 4-3 overtime loss to the Jets last night. Like Andrew Burnett said, yeah, it would have been nice to get a win. Of course it's always nice to get a win. But Willie, I'm sure in the arena last night, it didn't feel like that was a loss.
No, it was, in a way, it's like you don't want to. Now that you know you're in the playoffs, from here, it's just kind of like, look, save your bounces for the playoff games. Like, there's going to be a playoff game where you need to get a little lucky, where maybe it doesn't come easy. You just heard Andrew Burnett say sometimes things are difficult. So the win in overtime would have been gravy last night. The ovation that the team got, I love the awareness of the crowd. They knew as time was ticking down in regulation that was really the key. And so they were cheering at the end of regulation like they cheer when the team wins.
Yeah.
Because they knew that was the goal of last night. So it was a little bit of a anticlimactic finish, but that's fine. I think the other part of Andrew Burnett's press conference last night that I thought was really telling, they asked him about the underdog thing. Said, "Are you guys feel like you're underdogs? Do you think you've been having a chip on your shoulder kind of thing?" He goes, "I do think." He started off a little hesitant, and he said, "I do think we've worn that tag a little bit, and we kind of like that tag." He says, "I, as a player, kind of wore that tag, and I kind of like that." And he kind of ended with a little bit of he doesn't talk a lot of trash at all, Burnett, but he was kind of like, we kind of like proving people wrong. And that's what I think this team should be commended for, especially when they were sitting there at 5-10, and people were like, yeah, see, what are they doing?
Tell them
what
away.
What were they
Sarles.
doing?
Do
Why
this,
did they
do that.
Why did they sign O'Reilly? They should have just tanked. They should have just built for the future. And so the turnaround has got to be satisfying internally. And I think he could say more, but he's not that kind of guy. They're going to keep it internal. But
Say it in the locker room.
it's very satisfying, and I do think he also used the word confidence. The confidence that they had last night when they were behind 3-1, and they could have said, let's just take our chances with Chicago. Well, we can get a point in there, Chicago, Columbus. We'll get one in there. But the confidence of, oh, no, we're not going away tonight. And Connor Hellebuck's in goal, still no problem. We're going to come back and make this a game and take over the game. I think that is only building their confidence. Like the game in Colorado where they were up 4-2 and then they lost McDonough. I think they walked out of that game, even though they ended up losing 7-4. They were like, you know what? We didn't feel like we were overmatched against Colorado here in Colorado, the team with the best home record. So I think regardless of whether it's Dallas or Vancouver, and overwhelming odds would tell you it's going to be one of those two. Now, I think they will walk into that first round with confidence.
I think the biggest obstacle or hurdle moving forward for Coach Bruno is how do I keep, now that we've made the playoffs, how do I keep this team focused? Because even with three games left, they gotta remain focused as a team. Even though you've made the playoffs, you pretty much know which one of these teams you're gonna play. You still gotta stay focused. You still gotta stay dialed in. As my son says, you still gotta stay locked in. Because if you don't stay locked in, you then can't expect. I don't think this is a team that can just all of a sudden turn it on. I think they got to maintain that level of concentration. They got to maintain that level of being locked in. Even knowing that they have a playoff spot locked up, they still have to have that level of we're locked in. We know what it's going to take to beat either one of these teams. So we can't afford to, even in rest, we can't afford to not think about our opponent moving forward.
Well said, because I go back to something we've discussed. They end on Monday. The last game is Monday. That's in Pittsburgh. the playoffs don't start until Saturday, I think, and there's a chance that Nashville doesn't play on the first day of the playoffs. So there's going to be a gap. We've seen in the past, say a football team, an NFL team that gets the bye in the first round. And I'll go back to the 2008 Titans, who locked up the number 1 seed, but with a win over Pittsburgh. And then they kind of mailed it in the last regular season game, got crushed, rested everybody, and then I thought they were rusty. It didn't play a good game against your Ravens, D. Mason. They fumbled 3 times inside the 10-yard line. It was a nightmare game, and they lost. Baseball teams, who roll through, they clinch early, and then they have like a week off. You kind of you don't want to. That's I think a big thing for you that you're saying, D. Mace, is keep the focus, stay tuned in from now until that first playoff game. That's going to be a challenge.
And now we can actually talk about it.
We can talk about it. They got the X. They got an X.
Because it happened.
They're in. No
right.
more Worry Wart Willie.
No more
Worry Wart
Willie.
Willie is out of here.
At least
He's
on
outta
vacation for the next week or so.
Yes.
And then we'll start worrying again once we get to the playoffs. But we are in the playoffs. Hat tip to Max Hurst there. That's going to do it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Stillman & Company's up next.
Be love and love on your people. Peace.